The coins were still warm from the counting when Helena told me I was finished. She didn't lower her voice for it. She said it straight across the reward table, in front of the whole common room, the way a person tells you it looks like rain. I was out of the party. Done. For one full breath, I actually believed I'd misheard her over the noise. Did I do something wrong? I asked. I should have known better than to ask. The twins had been waiting for exactly that opening. Kirk shoved up from the bench first, loud the way he was always loud, and slapped a little book down on the boards between us. His brother Kane crowded in behind him, grinning, echoing every word half a beat late like he always did. The way they told it, I was a fraud. I'd spent years lying to their faces, they said, telling them golem maintenance was some rare and delicate art only I could manage, so they'd have to keep me around and keep paying my share. And now they had proof I'd made the whole thing up. A kind stranger had stopped them the day before, out in the street, and told them the truth of it. Maintenance was simple. Anyone could learn it in an afternoon. And to prove his goodwill, the man had pressed that little book into Kirk's hands and walked off smiling before either of them thought to ask his name. I looked at the book. Thin, cheap, the sort of thing a print shop runs off by the crate. And I felt the floor tilt under me, because golem craft is a dead art. The whole world lost it when the old civilization fell. I brought it back one page at a time, alone, and there is no simple manual for it anywhere on this earth, which meant that book should not have existed at all, and the smiling man who handed it over should not have known enough to make one. I said as much. I told them the stranger was playing them, that I wasn't lying, that they were trusting a face they'd known for a single afternoon over the man who'd kept them alive for years. Helena had already stopped listening. I could see it in her face. That cool, done with you look I'd caught on her before and told myself I was imagining. She called me the lowest sort of man. And then, since she had the floor, she went further and started listing my crimes. I was too meddlesome, she said, always fussing. I'd planned their meals for them like some nagging house servant. I'd argued them out of the fast roads onto the slow, safe ones. I'd made them stop and check chests before they opened them, made them cautious, made them small. Every single thing she named, I'd done on purpose, and I said so. The balanced meals were because a party that eats garbage collapses on the third day of a dungeon. I was the cook. I kept them standing. The safe roads were the ones without ambush ground. The chests I made them check were the ones that might have teeth, because a mimic wears the shape of treasure precisely, so a greedy hand reaches in and gets bitten off. Cook, navigator, scout, trap sense. I named the jobs one by one. They waved me off like I was reciting a shopping list. Then Kirk picked up my real manual. I don't know when he'd taken it off my pack. It was the one I'd written by hand over years. The actual maintenance record for our golem. Every tolerance and failure point and repair I'd ever learned. The closest thing in the world to the lost craft written down. He held it up so the whole room could see, said loud that they didn't need me or my scribbles anymore, and tore it in half. I heard it. That's the part that stayed with me. The dry rip of the spine giving, then the flutter as loose pages came free and drifted down over the ale rings on the table. Kane took one half from him and tore it again, laughing. And they went on tearing until the thing I'd bled years into was confetti on a tavern floor. And the common room half laughed along with them, because it's easy to laugh when a proud man is being taken apart, and it isn't you. Years of nights I'd spent on that book, hunched over a candle after they'd all gone to sleep, writing down the one craft the world had lost so that it would outlive me. I watched the halves of it settle into the spilled ale and understood that to them it had never been worth the paper. That was the moment the hurt went cold and quiet and stopped being hurt at all. At least take this, I started, reaching for the pack, for the spare, for anything. Nobody took it. Helena told me the party would be keeping my share of the reward, seeing as I'd earned it by fraud. And that was the end of the discussion. So I walked out. I didn't argue the coin. There's no arguing with people who've already decided you're a thief. I picked up my pack, left the torn pages where they lay, and went out through the door into a cold that felt almost kind after the heat of that room. Behind me, the twins had started up a chant, something crude and pleased with itself about the bigger cut of treasure they'd be splitting, now that the dead weight was gone. It followed me down the street, thinning as I got further, until the corner cut it off, and it was just my own boots on the stones. I want to tell you I felt rage. I didn't. Not yet. What I felt walking those empty streets was smaller and worse than rage. It was the plain arithmetic of it. Years. I gave that party years of my life, every unglamorous hour of it, and when a stranger they'd never met smiled and told a convenient lie, they believed him over me without stopping to think for even 1 second. That was my worth to them, measured out in full. One stranger's afternoon outweighed everything I was. I got back to my inn, and I did not sleep. I lay on the narrow bed, stared at the boards of the ceiling, and let myself go all the way back to the beginning. I was never the boy anyone bet on. Other children swung sticks like swords and dreamed of standing in the light where the heroes stand. There are only 13 heroes in the whole world, an old and half-inherited rank, the key that opens the deepest and richest dungeons. And every child alive wants to be one of the 13. I wanted the deep floors too. I just never had a scrap of the talent it was supposed to take. I couldn't swing a blade. I couldn't hold a spell together long enough to matter. By every measure that counted, I was nothing. What saved me was the woman who lived next door. Her name was Vera. She was old already when I was small, a scholar who could read the dead languages nobody else bothered with anymore. And for reasons I never fully understood, she looked at the useless neighbor boy and decided he was worth her time. She had a stack of ancient texts, salvage from the ruined civilization that had built things people now only tell stories about. Golems, most of all. Machines of stone and old spellwork that walked and worked and fought. A craft the world had let die when their makers died. Everyone said the knowledge was gone for good. Vera never said that. She sat me down at her cluttered table and we worked the text together, line by line, year after year, her patience against my stubbornness, until the dead symbols started to talk. I built my first crude golem out of that, then a better one. And somewhere in those long afternoons, the two of us made a promise to each other that one day, when I was grown and my craft was real, we would reach the deepest floor of an S-rank dungeon together and see with our own eyes what no one else had. "You'll get us there," she told me once, tapping the tablet between us. "The sword swingers never will. It takes a builder." She was the first person who ever looked at me and saw something other than a boy who couldn't fight. She might have been the only one, before tonight taught me the rest of the world's opinion in one clean lesson. I stopped remembering somewhere before dawn, and what was left when the ache burned off was very simple. I was done depending on people who saw me as a tool to be thrown out. Done handing my work to fighters who'd take the glory and keep the coin. If my craft was the only thing in this world that had never once failed me, then I would pour everything I had into my craft and stand on my own 2 feet. And I would build a golem so good that I would never again need to ask a single person for permission to exist. So I did the reckless thing. In the morning, I took out every coin I owned, savings enough to buy a fine house in the capital and live soft for years. And I spent all of it. Cores, rare alloys, reagents I'd only ever read the names of. If I failed, I'd starve. I didn't let myself think about that part. Then I sat down to design, and I threw out everything I thought I knew. The party's golem had been over 3 meters of stone, a holler and a wall, built to their orders and their taste. I didn't want another wall. I wanted something better than anything I had ever made. Smaller, human-sized, but faster and stronger than the giant by every measure that mattered, with no compromise anywhere in it, because there was no one left to compromise for. I tore up one blueprint, then the next, then a dozen more, chasing a design that kept refusing to be good enough. Pages piled up around my feet. I barely ate. I forgot the tavern for whole hours at a time, which was its own kind of medicine. It took a full week, 7 days and most of the nights, until the drawing in front of me was finally the thing I'd been reaching for, and my hands were steady, and there was nothing left to do but build it. I built it. When it was done, I stood over the still form on the table for a long moment before I could make myself set the last core and speak the word that would wake it. I braced for what I always braced for, the shudder, the grind, the heavy blind obedience of a machine coming online. That was all a golem had ever been. Stone that stands up when you tell it to. That is not what happened. The moment the craft caught, it began to glow. Soft at first, a light coming up from somewhere inside the frame, then brighter, until the whole shape of it shone through my fingers, and I pulled my hands back. And then, while I stood there, the golem changed. The lines of it softened and shifted and remade themselves in front of me. Stone flowing like it had never once been stone. The hard angles rounding into something slighter and finer than anything I had drawn on any of those pages. The light sank away. And lying on my work table, where a machine of stone should have been, was a girl. Not a statue of a girl, a girl. I could see the small rise and fall of breath she had no reason to be taking. I couldn't move. I'd built for years. I knew exactly what I had made and exactly what it was supposed to be, and this was not on any blueprint in the world, not mine and not the ancients. A golem does not breathe. A golem does not choose a shape. A golem, above all, does not have a will of its own. Then she opened her eyes. They found me at once, clear and calm and entirely present, looking back at the man standing over her, not up at a master waiting on orders, just at me, the way one person looks at another. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I should say something, and that I had nothing in me to say. Every word I owned was for cores and tolerances and repairs. None of it was for this. She sat up on the table as easily as waking from a good sleep, tilted her head, and took me in. The emptied room, the heaped blueprints, the man who'd made her. Whatever she saw, it didn't disappoint her. And she smiled. "Good morning, master," she said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I stood in a rented room I'd emptied my whole life to fill, thrown out of my own party a week before on a stranger's word, branded useless in front of a laughing room, and the useless man had just built a thing that opened its eyes and greeted him, a thing the entire world would swear was impossible. The party that dumped me thought they'd thrown away dead weight. They had no idea I'd just built the strongest thing in the city, and that she had only this moment opened her eyes. "Good morning, master." She said it from the edge of the work table, sitting up in my spare shirt with the sleeves swallowing her hands to the knuckles. A girl, a living girl, where a week of my savings and a full night of work had left a golem. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. I had built her. I knew every stone inside her, every circle, the exact place each seam would give if it ever gave at all. I did not know what to say to her looking at me like that. She slid off the table and knelt, just dropped, straight backed on the bare boards. "I don't know why I woke up this way," she said. "I only know that you are my master. Please take care of me." I had never given an order in my life. 3 years in a hero party, and I was the one who took them. Cook this, carry that, chart the tunnel, patch the golem before dawn. Nobody knelt to me. I didn't have the first idea what a man did with it, so I said the only thing I had ready. "I already picked a name for you." My voice came out rough. "It's Ada, if you want it." She turned the word over once, quiet, like she was tasting it. Then she smiled so wide it startled me. "Ada, I like it." She got to her feet. "I'll follow your orders always, master." I should have felt strange about that. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in a long while, that I wasn't standing in an empty room after all. I found her a length of cord for the trousers, rolled the sleeves back off her hands, and had just started wondering how you feed a thing that might not need feeding when the floor jumped under us. A crash, then screaming, close, from the direction of the square. We came out of the alley into a wall of heat. A flare wolf stood in the middle of the market. I'd only ever seen one drawn in a bestiary, a monster wreathed head to tail in living flame, its skull higher than a standing man, each paw crushing a stall to splinters and setting the wreckage alight as it went. Fire ran off it like water off a dog, shaking rain. Fruit carts, awnings, the old fountain rail, all of it catching. People were running the wrong way, the way panic runs, into corners with no exit. A monster like this was gold rank work. You sent your strongest sword arm and you prayed. I had a cheap iron short sword, and I'd handed it that morning to a girl in my rolled up shirt who had been alive for less than an hour. I trusted the build. I'd bled my whole savings into the frame and the core precisely so it would never come up short. Now I'd find out if I was right. The wolf reared back. Its jaws split, and the flame there pulled inward and brightened, winding up to breathe across the whole square, across the people packed against the far wall. "Ada." I heard my own voice go flat and certain. "Cut it down." She was already gone. I did not see her cross the ground. One instant, she stood at my shoulder. The next, there was only a line of turned up dust where her boots had been and a smear of silver at the wolf's flank. The fire came, a gout of it, roaring out and down. She went straight into it. The flame parted around her like a curtain pushed aside by a hand, closed behind her, and she was already through, already rising inside the monster's guard with that plain iron blade drawn back. One stroke, that was all it was. A single clean sweep, so fast the sound of it reached me a beat late. A flat, final crack of parted air. The flare wolf's charge simply stopped. Its own fire guttered out along its spine, embers falling dark. The great body came down in the ash of the stalls it had wrecked and did not move again, and the cheap sword had gone through hide and muscle and bone, as if none of the three had been there. I want to be clear about what I was looking at. That monster was gold rank. Whole parties trained for years and still buried people on a night they met one. My design had put it in the dirt in the time it takes to blink, with a self-defense blade I'd bought secondhand on the first morning of its life. I had known the numbers I built into her. I had not known what the numbers would look like standing up. The square went silent, except for the fires I now had to worry someone would put out. Ada turned to me, blade still low, not a mark on her, my old shirt not even singed. She was beaming. "We won, master!" I stood there with my heart going like a hammer, and understood, properly, for the first time, what I had made. Not a repaired party golem, not dead weight anybody's word could throw away. I had emptied my life into that frame and built the strongest thing in the city, and she was standing in the smoke asking if she'd done well. "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, "You did great. We stripped the useful parts off the wolf before a crowd could gather. The hide, the claws, the magic stone still warm at its chest, and slipped out the back streets to the guild before anyone thought to ask who'd killed it. The bounty was 1 gold coin and 3 silver. A gold was near a month's living for a common man. I'd never held one that was mine. Then I asked to register, properly, as an adventurer, on my own name, because until yesterday, I'd only ever held a scrap of special permission as the golem keeper of a hero's party, and that permission had walked out the door when the party did. The receptionist set down her pen and looked at me like I'd said something that made her glad and angry at the same time. "I'm so relieved," she said. "Honestly, we worried you'd never come back to us at all." I thought I'd misheard her. Worried about me. She wasn't finished. She started counting off things on her fingers. The meals I'd cooked that kept a whole party on its feet in the deep floors. The maps I'd drawn of tunnels nobody had charted. The herbs I'd harvested. The reports I'd written up clean enough that the guild filed them without a single correction. She named all of it out loud at the desk, like it had been sitting on a shelf waiting for someone to read it back to me. And she threw that away. Her voice dropped hard. "I always thought that woman wasn't the brightest. Expelling you, that was a foolish thing to do. There's talk, you know. A hero who makes a choice like that. The title doesn't have to stay hers." Down the desk, another receptionist nodded. Then a third, one who hadn't even been part of it, glanced over and nodded too. The way people do when someone finally says the thing the whole room already agreed on. I didn't say anything to the part about Helena. I didn't trust my voice for it. 3 years I'd believed I had no worth past keeping a golem running, and no friends at all. And here was a desk full of strangers quietly furious on my behalf. The party had told me every day, without ever saying it plainly, that the work I did didn't count, that meals and maps and clean reports were what you handed the man who couldn't hold a line in a fight. I'd believed them. It's a strange thing to hear it all read back as a list, and realize the guild had been keeping that same list for years, and had reached the opposite total. I told her I'd be fighting alongside my golem partner from now on. That was where Ada leaned in, bright as a coin, and announced it herself. "That's right, I'm the golem." The receptionist blinked at her. Ada, helpful as ever, took hold of the skin at her own wrist and slid it back. Just a little. Just enough, and underneath, the metal frame caught the lamplight, jointed and gleaming and unmistakable. The receptionist stared for a good long moment. Then she gathered herself, said my style was something like a tamer's, maybe, and left the job column on the form blank. That would get settled after the exam, she told me. It was scheduled for the next day. I signed my own name to my own registration, nerves, and something warmer fighting in my chest, and walked out an adventurer to be for the first time in my life. Back at the room, I did the thing I'd have done my first hour if the wolf hadn't interrupted. I studied her. A golem that walks and talks and takes a shape is impossible. I knew that the way I knew my own hands, and I still had it sitting on my work table. So the only honest move was to find out how. I checked her the way I'd check any build, and the first reading stopped me cold. She was generating magic on her own, making it the way a living creature does, the way stone and metal simply cannot. Ordinary golems have no magic at all. Ada had a well of it running quietly inside her, and when I traced what kind, I had to sit down. Dimensional storage, I said, mostly to myself. A legendary magic, the sort that lives in old theory and footnotes, because no one has ever confirmed a single living being who actually had it. A pocket of separate space you could put things into and pull them back out at will. It was supposed to be a scholar's daydream. It was inside the girl I'd assembled from stones and hope in 1 week. Like this? Ada asked. She held up a copper coin, and it was gone. Just gone. No flash, no trick. She opened her hand again a moment later, and there it sat, cool in her palm, returned from nowhere. I stared at that coin longer than a grown man should stare at a coin. I kept waiting to catch the seam of it, a slot, a false finger, some slight I'd built without noticing. There wasn't one. The coin had left the world for a second and come back at her asking. If I'd stood up in the guild hall an hour ago and told that receptionist my golem carried dimensional storage, she'd have written me down as a man who'd taken a knock to the head. And she'd have been right to. It didn't exist. It was in my room, doing card tricks. And then the maker in me started running, because a space that holds things and hands them back means one thing above all others. It means she doesn't have to be only ever one weapon. I could build her forms, whole armaments, kept folded away in that dimension, called out, and swapped to fit whatever stood in front of her. One companion who could answer anything. It was the exact self-reliance I'd sworn to, made real in a single afternoon. "I want to be strong," Ada said, leaning over the bench. "For your sake, Master. Whatever you need me to be." So I built the first one. I opened her core, colored stones, and a circle layout I could rearrange like tiles. And I fitted in the Flare Wolf's magic stone, still faintly warm from the morning. I reworked the whole right arm around it, rerouting the flow so the flame would come out clean and aimed instead of wild. It took hours. Delicate, close work. The kind where you learn where a thing wants to break so you can make sure it never does. When I closed her up, her right arm could pour fire on command. I called it the flare cannon form, the first of them, stored in that impossible space, ready the instant she reached for it. That was the whole shape of the idea, sitting there finished on my bench. Every monster we put down from here on wasn't just a bounty. It was a stone, and a stone was a new form. And a new form meant that whatever came at us next, she'd already have the answer folded away, waiting. She flexed the hand, felt the new weight of what was in her, and thanked me like I'd given her the world. I looked at her then, swallowed up in my old shirt, cord holding the trousers, boots too big, and it struck me as plainly wrong. "Let's go for a walk," I told her. "I'm buying you clothes of your own. You shouldn't be going around in my cast-offs." She lit up the way she had at her name. "Really? Thank you, Master." We went out into the last of the day and found her a proper dress, something that was hers and not a hand-me-down, and she turned in at once to show me and could not stop smiling. A morning ago, I'd been branded useless in front of a laughing room, wiped down to my last coin. Now I had a companion who cut a gold rank monster out of the air in one stroke, carried a legendary power the scholars swore was a myth, and grew stronger every time I opened her up. Tomorrow, I'd sit an exam and register in front of the whole guild. Whatever they made of a man who fought with a golem that shouldn't exist, they'd have to write it in their book. Ada fell into step beside me, new hem swinging, and asked what we'd build next. I didn't have an answer yet. For the first time in a long time, that felt like a promise instead of a threat. It had been a week since I walked out. In that week, the hero party managed to break everything I had spent years keeping alive. I wasn't there for it. I heard it the way you hear anything in this city. The guild talks, the tavern talks, and a hero party coming apart is the kind of story that travels fast. So let me tell it the way it reached me. The morning after they threw me out, they took my old golem into a high-ranked dungeon. 3 yards of packed, purified soil, strong enough to tank a charging beast and haul a season's worth of materials on its back. For a while, it did exactly that. Then its arm started moving wrong. A small hitch, a half-second of drag on the swing. I would have caught it in a heartbeat. I always knew where that golem wanted to break. They found out by breaking it. Helena ordered the twins to service the core. They cracked the chest open and stopped, because inside was nothing like the tidy little diagram in the maintenance book their friendly stranger had handed them. Layered stones in a dozen colors, set in an order that took me half a year to learn. A magic circle wound so fine it looked like frost on glass, and every line of it load-bearing. Pull one thread, and the whole weave sags. That golem's insides were the closest thing I had to a diary. I knew every stone in it by touch. Kirk went in with a rag to wipe a smudge, and wiped away half a rune instead. The left arm died on the spot. It just hung there, dead weight. A whole limb gone because a man who couldn't read the circle decided it was dirty. They tried to fix it. That was the mistake that turned a bad day into a disaster. Kane and Kirk redrew the pattern from guesswork, arguing over every line, and the golem answered the way a wounded thing answers a stranger's hands. It thrashed, swung its good arm, and threw Kirk clear across the clearing into a tree. So they gave up on the left. Then Helena found a chip on the right arm and decided she could handle that one herself. My whole method for that golem was patience. Draw the impurities out of the soil, knead it soft, blend it slow so it bonded to the body and set like living stone. It took hours. It was boring. It was the exact kind of quiet work they had always looked straight through. Helena's version was a fistful of packed dirt and a shove of raw magic into a precision seam, the way you'd force mud into a clock and expect it to keep time. The right arm snapped off clean and dropped in the leaves. That was the moment, I think, that they stopped being a hero party and started being 3 people alone in a monster forest with a statue that couldn't lift its hands. Without the golem, there was no front line, so Helena put Kirk on it. Kirk is an archer. He has never held a melee weapon in his life. They handed him a thick tree branch and told him to hold the line, and the dungeon did what a dungeon does to a man holding a stick. He was battered, then poisoned, then turned half to stone from the waist down, while Kane burned through his healing trying to keep him upright. A mimic nearly took his arm off before he understood the chest was a mouth. mouth. They had never learned any of this, because the golem used to eat every status effect for them. Poison, petrification, curses, it soaked all of it, and they had spent years thinking the dungeon was mild. It was never mild. I had just been standing between them and it, and so had the thing I built. And it wasn't only the fighting, the cooking was mine too. That first night, they ate their own undercooked meat and spent the dark hours sick behind the trees. They misread their own maps and got lost. They walked past the rare materials because no one knew which ones were rare, and left the valuable parts rotting on the monsters they did manage to kill. Every hour, something they had never once thought about went wrong, because for years it had simply been done, quietly, by the useless man they were glad to be rid of. A run that used to take them half a day took 3. They limped out of that dungeon on the 3rd evening with less loot than they'd carried in tools. Gear shattered, potions spent, poisoned and sore, and barely speaking to each other. They had gone in to prove they never needed me. They came out at a loss. You would think that would be enough to teach them something. It taught them exactly one thing. They needed a supporter. They came to the guild to hire one. Helena stood at the counter and read out her list of requirements, and by the time she finished, half the hall had gone quiet to listen. She wanted someone who could cook, wash the dishes, draw the maps, scout ahead, disarm the traps, harvest the materials, do the laundry, write the reports, and walk into the deepest dungeons without flinching. The receptionist wrote it all down, blinked at the length of it, and went to check the rolls. When she came back, she told them the truth, plainly, in front of everyone. There was exactly one person in the city who fit that list. His name was Nathan. He had registered days ago. He was sitting the adventurer's exam tomorrow. For one breath, the twins actually cheered. Then it landed, all 3 at once. The perfect candidate, the only candidate, was the man they had torn a manual over and thrown into the street. Helena did not apologize. I want to be fair and report that accurately, because it's the whole shape of what came next. She did not say she was wrong. She said that if I wanted to come back, if I came and asked properly, she might in her generosity allow it. The twins nodded along like it was reasonable, and having decided that begging was beneath her, she landed on a different plan. The manual, the one they had shredded and thrown out a week before. She would simply go and get it back. That is how the great hero Helena ended up knee-deep in a garbage heap. They went to the city dump to dig the manual back out of the trash. 3 of them in the field, on their hands and knees in other people's refuse, sorting rot for a book they had destroyed on purpose. The regular scavengers watched them work and drew the obvious conclusion that these were 3 unlucky souls fallen on hard times. A kind, middle-aged woman came over, looked at them with real pity in her eyes, and pressed a piece of bread into Helena's filthy hands before moving on. They took the bread. What else were they going to do? Then Kirk found paper, torn pages, a whole sheaf of them, the right size and the right ruin to be a shredded manual. And before Helena could grab it, a garbage picker got there first, a lean, grinning man who had clearly spent his life reading exactly this kind of desperation on exactly this kind of face. He said the scraps were his. He'd been saving them, he said. But for the right price, maybe. The price started at 1 gold. It did not stay there. He watched Helena's eyes, watched how badly she wanted it, and every time she reached, he raised it. 2 gold, then 3, and change on top of that. She was a hero haggling with a trash picker over garbage, and she was losing. She paid 3 gold and 4 silver, near a season's wages for a working family, for a fistful of wet, torn paper. The picker vanished the instant the coins changed hands, and when the 3 of them knelt there in the heap and pieced the scraps together, edge to edge, trembling, what slowly assembled under their hands was not a golem manual at all. It was a recipe, a stained, lovingly detailed recipe for delicious curry. I found out the ending myself because I walked straight into it. Ada and I had gone out to shop after her modification, and to skip the crowds we cut along the edge of the garbage yard, both of us holding our breath against the smell. I was mid-thought about tomorrow's exam when I heard it, a voice I knew far too well wailing from the top of a trash heap. Helena was up there, thrashing in the refuse, red-eyed, her pure white armor smeared brown with filth, howling about 3 gold and 4 silver and a worthless scrap of paper. Kirk and Kane hovered at the base of the pile, not sure whether to climb up or run. For a second, I just stood there, a week's worth of being called useless answered in one picture, and I didn't feel triumphant. I mostly felt like I wanted to be somewhere that didn't smell like this. "Hey," I said, "what in the world are you 3 doing?" She froze. Then she stood in her ruined armor and pulled herself into the straightest, most dignified posture a person has ever managed while standing in garbage. She informed me, with total composure, that they were enjoying themselves. "Garbage picking," she said, as a hobby, a fine one. The twins caught up half a beat late and chimed in that yes, garbage picking was wonderful fun, their eyes not quite meeting mine. Ada looked up at me, then at the weeping hero on the trash mountain, and quietly asked whether these were the people who used to give me orders. They are, I told her. Helena decided the conversation was over and told me to leave. And then, as I turned to go, she called after me in a lighter voice, the voice of someone bestowing a gift. She was in a generous mood today, she said. If I ever thought about returning to the hero party, well, she might just allow it. There it was. The whole reason for the wish list, the dump, the manual, all of it, wrapped up and handed to me as a favor. Come back and be the man who does everything so they can feel strong. Come back and stand between them and the dungeon again, quietly, gratefully, for a smaller share than the golem I built now earns before breakfast. A week ago, that offer would have meant something to me. A week ago, I still half believed the story they told about me, that I was lucky to be carried, that a man who couldn't swing a sword should be grateful for a corner of someone else's glory. I had believed it long enough to answer to it. I didn't believe it anymore. I had gone home, spent every coin I owned, and built something that felled a gold rank monster in one stroke and called me master. The useless man had made the strongest thing in the city. I didn't have to think about it. I have no intention of coming back, I said. I'll make it on my own as an adventurer. I'll reach the dungeons myself. Then I took Ada's hand and walked, before Helena could find a reply, before the smell could soak any deeper into my clothes. Ada fell into step beside me, glancing back once at the hero shrinking into the trash behind us, and I felt her decide something quiet that I'd only understand later. Behind us, one debt had just come due, the first small payment on a much larger bill. Ahead of us, past one more sleepless night, was the exam. The morning after the garbage yard, we walked in through the back gate of the outlying guild branch, and nobody looked at us twice. That suited me. I had spent years being looked at twice by people who then decided I wasn't worth the first glance. A room full of strangers who assumed I was nothing was, honestly, a kind of rest. The registration exam ran in two parts. A veteran proctor laid it out for the whole field, a broad, easy man with a gold elite badge on his chest, and the slouch of someone who had done this 100 times. First, target destruction, to measure what you could hit and how hard. Second, a mock battle against him. Simple. The targets were the interesting part. Metal pillars wrapped in leather or chain stood across the ground. Higher up, wooden targets hung on wires strung between the trees, and some of those swung on a slow arc, driven by a water wheel turning in the river beside the field. Each target hid a point value. The tougher, the farther, the more it moved, the more it was worth. 5 minutes a candidate. Ada stood at my shoulder in her own white dress, hands folded, taking it all in the way she took in everything, like a student who intended to be asked about it later. A few of the other candidates looked us over. Slight man, slighter girl, no visible weapon between us. I watched the corners of two mouths lift. I had seen that exact expression on better-dressed faces, and it had cost those faces everything they owned. I didn't say so. The first candidate went up with a one-handed sword and went at the leather-wrapped pillars. He was quick and clean. 5 of them down inside the limit. The field clapped. A solid, respectable score, and everyone knew it. The proctor got bored watching and wandered over to us to talk, which told me he'd already decided we weren't worth watching either. He nodded across the field at 2 young men waiting their turn and told us those were the ones to watch. The Hunter brothers, famous before they'd even registered. The first was sharp-eyed and lean, a great bow in his hand. He picked the aerial targets, the hard ones, the swinging ones. He loosed, and a still target burst on its wire. Then he tracked one of the moving ones, the slow arc of the water wheel carrying it, and put an arrow clean through it in motion. The field made a low sound. The proctor told me, almost proud, that no one had hit a moving target in 3 years. The archer wasn't finished, and he made sure we knew it. "Barrett!" someone cheered. His sister, I gathered. His brother went next, a big man, a giant hammer, and no interest in anything subtle. Otis walked up to the chain-wrapped pillars, the high-value ones, built to take punishment, and took them apart 3 strikes each. 7 of them gone, inside the limit. The ground shook a little every time he swung. The proctor watched his 2 favorites with his arms folded and said the thing lazy men always say when they feel safe, that his job was easy, that the only way it got hard was if some hero-level candidate turned up and destroyed every target at once. And that, he added, was impossible. I filed the word away. Impossible. People kept handing me that word like a gift. Then they called my turn. I sent Ada out onto the field alone and gave her one order. "Ada, change form." She glowed. That's the plainest word for it. Light ran over her in shifting bands, every color at once, and out of the space I'd folded into her, the storage no one but me knew she carried. She drew her armament. Her right arm reshaped into the long wolf head weapon, A crimson skirt of flare-wolf hide settled at her waist, the heat-proof build I'd fitted her with after we put that monster down. The whole change took a breath and a half. She braced and the wolf head came up, and she called it out. "Here it comes! Flare blast!" The sky caught fire. A single jet of flame went up the full height of the field and spread, and it didn't pick targets. It took all of them, every wooden target on every wire, still and swinging alike. The wires themselves, the water wheel's slow arc of hanging marks, all of it, wrapped in one sheet of fire and gone in the time it takes to gasp. Ash drifted down where a dozen targets had been strung a moment before. Nobody clapped this time. The field had gone completely silent. I heard one man whisper that her output was monstrous. Another said she wasn't on the same level as the rest of them. She was on a different one entirely. The proctor didn't say anything at all. His mouth was open. His idle joke about a hero-level candidate had walked onto his field and lit the sky, and he knew it. Ada looked back at me, and for once, even she seemed startled by what she'd done. Master, I wasn't told the armament would be this powerful." She added quickly that she wasn't complaining, only surprised. "Was it enough?" I asked. "More than enough," she said. "Thank you." I looked at the ground targets still standing, the leather pillars, the chained ones the brothers had struggled with. I could have had her sweep those too, but I wanted to see something. I'd been building toward it for weeks, and an open field with 50 eyes on it was exactly the place to find out if it worked. "Come back, I'll take the rest myself." Here is the thing the party never understood about me, right up to the day they tore my manual in half. A golem, done properly, is a life's work. You choose the stones, you set the frame, you inscribe the circle a hair at a time, because it has to hold for years. Take a hit, shrug off water, keep its shape through 100 fights. That was the craft I was raised in. That was the craft they called useless. After they threw me out, I stopped asking a golem to last. I knelt and put both hands flat on the dirt and pushed my magic down into it, and I called up something I'd never shown a living soul. Not a companion, not a thing to keep, a tool for one single minute of its life. The ground heaved. Earth pulled itself up out of the field in a rising column, packing tighter as it climbed, arms unfolding, shoulders squaring, a humanoid over 3 meters tall, raw and faceless, built for exactly one thing and nothing else. No defense, no water resistance, no lastingness at all. Every scrap of it spent on power, because on this field, for the next 5 minutes, power was all it would ever need. I said, "Move." It moved. It reached down, took a chain-wrapped pillar in one fist, the kind Otis had needed 3 swings for, tore it out of the ground, and drove it into the next one. Both frames crushed flat, metal and all, not dented, crushed. The field's silence broke into noise. One man said he'd bled to break a single one of those, and my golem had folded 2 together like wet reeds. Another swore he'd never seen a thing like it, even in an A-rank dungeon. A third just kept repeating that I'd raised it out of nothing. In an instant, no summoning circle, no warning, that it wasn't possible. There was that word again. The golem worked down the field, leather pillars, chain pillars, the last of the standing marks. It went through them without hurry and without mercy, and it did not miss one. When the 5-minute limit ran out, 56 targets had been destroyed. The whole field, every single one. The brothers, the best prospects anyone had seen in years, had managed about 5 apiece. I had left nothing for the proctor to score against. It's mine it was up. The great earthen body slowed, staggered, and the magic holding it let go all at once. 3 meters of golem came apart in the air and fell back to the field as plain dirt, a soft brown heap where a giant had stood. I crouched by the pile and put my hand on it, because someone should. "Thank you," I said. "Good work." It couldn't hear me. That wasn't the point. Something bumped my shoulder. Ada had come back in her own dress, and she leaned her head forward, pointed, and informed me that she had also worked hard and would like to be told so, please. Out loud this time, not thanked in passing like a heap of dirt. I hesitated. Half the field was still staring, and then I put my hand on her silver hair and told her good work too. She smiled like I'd handed her the whole day. I let myself feel it for exactly 1 breath. Then I made myself stop. There was still a second test, and I had already started to like the sound of the crowd more than a careful man should. The second test was a mock battle. Wooden weapons, no real edges. 1 candidate against 1 exam assistant, so nobody got hurt proving a point. The assistants came out to pick their matches, and there were enough of them for everyone. They squabbled cheerfully over who got which candidate, and every one of them found a reason not to be standing anywhere near me and Ada. They drifted. They developed sudden interest in the far end of the yard. One of them all but shoved a colleague toward us and backed away. I thought I understood. A man who fights with neither sword nor bow nor honest magic, who kneels down and grows an army out of the dirt, isn't the kind of adventurer people are comfortable calling a peer. They didn't want to fail me. They didn't want to accept me either. I'd felt that before. I told myself I'd made my peace with it. Ada leaned close and said quietly that we were certainly being avoided, but that I had the reason wrong. It wasn't what I imagined. I didn't get to ask what she meant, because our opponent finally arrived, over an hour late and loudly hungover. He strolled up rubbing his temple and told the supervisor he hadn't felt like today, so he'd had a couple drinks that morning and lost track of time. The proctor, supervising this half too, laid into him about the mouth and the lateness, the way you scold someone you've scolded many times before. The assistant shrugged all of it off. Word around the yard was that he was actually the best of today's assistants, which he clearly believed harder than anyone. He took one look at us and wrote us off out loud. Skinny arms, he said, no presence. A pair of failures who'd be doing the real adventurers a favor by going off to pick herbs instead. He waved the back of his hand at us like he was shooing livestock. And here is the part I'm not proud of. It landed. Not because I believed him, because some small, newly fat part of me had spent the last hour enjoying being feared, and his contempt caught that part red-handed. I'd watched a whole field go pale at my golem, and I'd started, quietly, to think I was owed the awe. That's the exact rot I watched eat Helena alive. I felt sick that I'd grown even a seed of it, so I decided to take him seriously. Deadly seriously. If he was the best they had, I told myself, then the swagger was probably a mask over something real, and I'd be a fool to swing at him lightly. The assistant drew his wooden sword and, grinning, gave me one piece of senior wisdom. The single most important skill for an adventurer, he said, is the ability to judge your opponent's strength. Ada murmured that if she went all out, it might be too much for a person. The supervisor, meanwhile, would not stop telling us to hold nothing back. Full power. Go all out. Don't you dare go easy. And every time he said it, his grin got a little wider, like a man setting a table for a meal he'd been waiting all week to watch. I missed all of it. I bowed my head, told the assistant I understood, and said I'd go all out. I meant it as humility. The supervisor dropped his hand and the match began, and Ada moved. I want to describe what she did, but there isn't much to describe. She crossed the ground. Her sword met his wooden one. That was the whole fight. The assistant made a show of it, a big theatrical flinch, a startled sound, the performance of a man reacting to a worthy strike. Except it wasn't a performance. He simply hadn't seen her start. His body was still catching up to a blow that had already happened. Her strike took his sword and took him with it, and he left the ground and traveled a surprising distance and landed in a heap and did not get up. Out cold, comically, completely limp. I stood there certain I'd missed something. He was the best of them. He'd lectured me on reading an opponent. I actually leaned toward Ada and asked whether the man had still been hiding his real strength, because surely one tap couldn't have finished the best assistant on the field. The supervisor called the match. Ours. He was laughing before he finished the word. Then he explained it to me slowly, the way you explain a joke to the one person who didn't get it. There was no hidden strength. There never had been. The assistant hadn't been acting. He genuinely could not perceive how fast Ada was, could not gauge her at all, and a man who can't measure the gap dies pretending it isn't there. Ada far outclassed him. She far outclassed everyone in the yard. That was why the assistants had scattered from us all morning. Not disgust, fear. They'd watched the first test. They knew exactly what we were, and not one of them had wanted to be the fool who got sent flying. Every assistant had known but me, and the one who hadn't gotten the message, the loud, hungover, self-appointed best of them, was the one the supervisor had quietly fed to us on purpose. He admitted it plainly, still grinning. The man got carried away too easily and had needed a lesson, and we'd been the perfect ones to teach it. He apologized for using us. He didn't look remotely sorry. Then he said the part I'd walked in wanting to hear. Your ability far exceeds a gold rank adventurer's. You passed the exam without question, far past gold rank, on our own name. Nobody's manual, nobody's party, nobody's permission, just what I'd built and the girl who carried it. Ada turned to me with her hand up and both eyes shining, waiting. We did it, Master. We did it, Ada. I met her hand. I'd wanted to make it as an adventurer on my own terms, and standing in that dusty yard with a fainted examiner behind us and a laughing veteran signing our names, I finally had. Registered, independent, owing the party that threw me away exactly nothing, and I filed one more thing away, under the win, where I'd be sure to find it later. An hour hour ago, a smug man's contempt had stung me, and it had stung because I'd started believing my own crowd. Strength hadn't made me a fool today, but I'd felt how easily it could. I decided to keep that feeling close. It was, I thought, the most useful thing I'd learned all day, and I'd learned it from the worst man in the yard. I wasn't there when the bill came due. I heard how it went later, and I'll be honest with you, I enjoyed every word. They were slumped in their old tavern, the three of them, days deep into the life they'd chosen when they threw me out. The golem sat broken in a corner, and none of them could wake it. Their fights had gotten hard. They'd gotten lost in dungeons they used to walk blind. Their harvests came back thin, their coin came back thinner, and for the first time in years, they were cooking their own meals and washing their own clothes. They'd spent 2 whole days digging through their own garbage, looking for the maintenance manual I'd left them. The one the twins tore in half the day I left. They didn't find it. Of course they didn't. And through all of it, not one of them said the obvious thing out loud. Helena blamed me, not for anything I'd done, but for having the nerve to actually leave after she exiled me. The twins agreed with her the way they always agreed with her, loudly and without a single thought behind it. Then, she pulled out a letter from the Adventurers Guild and told them their troubles were over. She'd reported the golem broken, so surely the guild was writing to offer a repairman. She was that certain. They packed up and marched down there grinning. The receptionist did not offer them a repairman. She asked them to pay for the golem they'd broken. Here's the part they never knew. When I joined that party, I didn't bring the golem in as my property. I donated it to the guild, and the party borrowed it for free. And the loan came with a contract. If the golem broke, the whole party paid for it. All 3 of them had put their names to that. Back when reading, it felt beneath them. She slid the figure across the counter, and the number had too many marks on it to be real. 2,000 gold. Enough to feed a family for years. Enough to buy a house and the street it stood on. I'm told Helena read it 3 times. I'm told the twins leaned in, moving their lips, and got quietly lost somewhere around the middle. Then all 3 of them decided, out loud and at the same time, that it was a clerical error. Too many zeros. Someone had slipped in a mark or 2 by mistake, and once the nice woman fixed it, they'd be on their way. The receptionist didn't blink. She pointed out, very politely, that the golem had carried them through S-rank dungeons and made them a fortune, and that the very day it broke was the day they slid into the red. If they wanted proof of what the thing was worth, she said, they only had to look at their last month. They were living in it. That shut the tavern loud part of them right up. Then she gave them the guildmaster's one mercy. Repair the golem inside 1 week, and the debt was forgiven. Not a day more. There was exactly 1 person alive who could repair that golem, and they'd torn up his manual and shown him the door. Helena understood that. What she decided, sitting there with a week to save herself, was that she would not ask me. She'd make me come crawling back on my own, begging for the honor, and it would cost her nothing and cost her pride even less. 3 people who overrated their own cleverness had just agreed on a plan. It was going to drag them somewhere much worse. I didn't know any of this yet. I was having the best day of my life. I got to the guild so early the doors were still locked. We're here too soon, Ada, I admitted, and she just smiled up at the shuttered windows, patient the way she was about everything. I'll tell you where I stood. Bronze rank, bottom of the ladder. Bronze, then silver, then gold, then platinum. And above all of it, the 13 heroes. That's where I meant to go. Platinum, on my own name, 1 honest quest at a time. In my whole hero party career, I'd only ever touched S-rank dungeons. I had never once done the rookie work. I'd been robbed of the beginning, and I wanted it. I took 2 quests. Herb gathering for healing potion stock, that one I chose purely because I'd never had it. And large rabbit extermination, farm pests, because the reward was fat, and I was down to 2 silver coins to my name. Master, that's a lot of rabbits, Ada said, reading the notice over my shoulder. I told her not to worry, that I had a plan for the rabbits. Then the doors opened, we stamped the papers, and caught the carriage out. Fernwood Forest was the gentlest dungeon I'd ever set foot in. Weak little monsters, a rookie's playground. I hadn't slept much the night before. I felt like a boy again. I found the herb patch off the guild map, and I gathered by hand for hours, slow and careful, taking the good stalks and leaving enough behind to grow back. Ada kept watch beside me the whole time. It was nothing work. It was quiet, and it was mine, and no one was standing over my shoulder telling me it was beneath a real adventurer. I filled the bag and felt genuinely proud of it, which I know sounds ridiculous. We stopped for lunch on a fallen log. I'd packed sandwiches that morning, and I handed her one. Master's cooking is always the best, Ada said around a mouthful, and she meant it. She's a golem. She doesn't need to eat. She does it anyway, tasting every bite and turning the food into magic somewhere inside her, and I still don't fully understand how. I just liked watching her enjoy it. Joy. The rabbit ground was a farmer's field turned to sponge, burrows everywhere, and near the fence, a novice tamer was losing a war. He'd set his wolf beast on a single large rabbit, and the rabbit was making a fool of it, cutting and juking, gone before the wolf could close. Ugh, it's too fast, he groaned, hands on his knees. He was going about it exactly the way instinct tells you to, and instinct was wrong. Large rabbits are nothing in a fight. They're only speed, and even the speed is a trick. Their little hearts give out if they sprint too long. You don't chase them. You cut off the exits and let them exhaust themselves. I knelt and put my hand to the dirt and raised 20 mini golems out of it, small and cheap, just enough spec to dig and shove. I sent them down the burrows to flush the rabbits up, and Ada took them by the ears as they came boiling out of the ground. Got it, she called, then a second later. Master, one's getting away. Golems, seal the other holes, I shouted. Keep it running. She ran it flat. She never tires, and the rabbit couldn't say the same, and it dropped mid-sprint with its own heart spent. The tamer stood at the fence with his wolf and watched the whole thing happen, mouth open, like he was trying to figure out which part had been the trick. There wasn't one. It was just knowing where the thing wanted to break. We filled bags until we ran clean out of bags, so I walked one stuffed sack over to the tamer and offered to trade it for 5 empty ones. Wait, that's a real deal for me, he said, blinking like I'd handed him gold. By the time the sun went low, we'd filled 20 sacks, each one near as tall as me, and I stood there in a wrecked field smelling of dust and grass, quietly, stupidly happy. We hauled the whole cart back to the guild at dusk. I turned in the herbs first, and the receptionist praised the count and the quality both. Then I pulled the tarp off the rabbits. She stared. She started to count. Somewhere in the second cartload, she stopped counting and just looked at me. You caught all of these in one day? She said. I told her I thought I might have overdone it a little. Not a little, she said. The old record was 2 bags. I'd brought in more than 100 rabbits. I sold the ears as proof of the kill and the bodies for meat, and kept exactly 1 back. There was something about the material I wanted to try later. It came to 3 gold and 2 silver, a fortune to me that morning. Then she checked my contribution tally and went still again. The haul had rocketed me past the threshold for the silver promotion exam, and one of the exam's own conditions was clearing 20 large rabbits in a day. I'd cleared more than 100. There was nothing left to test. In a rare case like this, we skipped the exam, she said, and handed me a silver license across the counter. Bronze to silver in a single day. Then she added, lightly, like it was small talk, that the few who'd ever done that had all gone on to become heroes. And there it was, the flicker, gold, platinum, a hero cracking open an S-class dungeon, my name on it. I felt the whole daydream light up for half a second. I shook my head, physically, to knock it loose. I'd just spent months watching what pride did to the people who threw me out, how it ate their sense first and their money after. I wasn't going to hand that same thing a room in my head just because a stranger said a kind word about heroes. Silver in a day was enough. Silver in a day was more than a man like me was ever promised. You did it! Congratulations, master! Ada was beaming. Then, hopefully, was the reward maybe for dinner? I laughed and told her we were going to eat, and that tonight we'd have whatever she wanted, because she'd worked as hard as I had. She thought about it seriously, the way she thinks about everything. Then, I'd like to try something called steak. Steak. I could do steak. I was still smiling about it when we reached the door. 3 people were standing in it. Helena, with the twins flanking her, filling the doorway so we couldn't pass. I hadn't seen them since the day I walked out. They looked worse than I remembered, and far more desperate than they'd ever let themselves look in front of me. A week of ruin bearing down on them, and here, blocking the exit, was the one man alive who could lift it. They didn't move. Neither did I. Ada stepped a half pace forward and to my side, the way she always does when something isn't right, and waited to see what I wanted. I already had a fair idea of why they were here. A broken golem, 1 week to fix it, and no coin to pay a real craftsman. I was the plan. I was the whole plan. And knowing Helena, she'd have talked herself into believing that standing in a doorway counted as me offering. Somewhere across the city, a 2,000 gold clock was ticking down, and the 3 people who'd torn up my manual and shown me the door had come, at last, to stand in mine. The 3 of them were pretending they hadn't seen me. Helena stood a little apart with her chin up, announcing to the empty street that her party had wonderful news. Improved benefits. Starting now, 1 walnut a day for every member and a certificate of good work for anyone who earned it. She held the certificate up so the lamplight caught it. The handwriting on it was so bad, I could read the desperation from across the road. Beside her, the twins picked up the routine, loud and stiff, like two men reading lines they hadn't practiced. There was this fellow, Kirk said to nobody, a golem hand, name started with an N, and maybe a fellow like that would want to come back for a snack. Kane agreed that a fellow like that would be a fool not to. I kept walking. Ada walked at my shoulder in her white dress, quiet, watching them the way you watch a kettle you don't trust. I didn't slow down. I'd spent years learning exactly where these two stopped listening, and I already knew there was nothing behind their eyes worth stopping for. They cut in front of me, first the twins, shoulder to shoulder, filling the doorway so I couldn't pass. Then the demand came out plain. I was to come back tonight and stop making things difficult. I looked at the two of them, broke and cornered and still puffing their chests, and I asked the only question I had. Are you two in trouble without me? They shouted that they were not. They shouted it far too loudly and far too long, and the shouting was the whole answer. Ada leaned in close and dropped her voice so only I could hear it. Those two insulted you, master, she murmured. As your golem, I cannot forgive that. I was still deciding how to get around them without a fight when someone behind us clapped their hands, twice, bright and pleased, like a woman arriving exactly where she meant to be. She was young, with short black hair curled at the ends, and a pair of golden eyes that moved over all of us the way a cat moves over a room full of mice. Small, relaxed, smiling like she already knew how the night ended. She said she was Rachel, an arbitrator out of the guild headquarters, where every last member holds platinum rank. Her people settled disputes cleanly, she said, so nobody carried a grudge home afterward. Then she offered the fix, a duel, 2 against 2. Both sides bound to the result, no arguing after. The twins loved it. They agreed before she finished the sentence. I didn't love it, but I saw what she was building, so I let her build it. Rachel tallied the sides on her fingers with obvious delight. My companion counted as my own strength, she noted, so in truth it was their 2 against my 1. That made their demand lopsided, and a lopsided demand had to carry a heavier price. She turned her golden eyes on the brothers and told them what they'd wager, 300 gold, every coin they owned. The number landed on them like a dropped stone. 300 gold was a lifetime, a house, decades of quiet living, everything the two of them had scraped together. For one long moment, even they understood it. Ada tipped her head at them, sweet as anything. You're not scared, are you? She asked. That did it. Backed against their own pride with a crowd of nobody watching, the twins bellowed that they'd bet the gold, their homes, their lives, anything, because there was no world in which they lost to me. And your side? Rachel asked me. I said the only thing I wanted from them. If I win, you leave me alone. For good. She liked that. She liked that a great deal. She set it for noon the next day, the Citizen Arena, and walked off into the dark, still smiling. By noon, the arena was full. I'd stood in the waiting room until my hands went cold, and Ada had put her palm flat against my back and told me the plan I'd drawn had no holes in it, that we would win without a doubt. She said it like a fact she'd already checked. Then we walked out onto the sand. The noise hit like weather, thousands of them leaning over the rails, roaring at the matchup somebody had painted for them on the way in. The cast-off golem hand of the hero party against the party's own twin aces. Half the city had come to see which story was true. The twins came out the far gate flexing for the crowd, shouting that they were invincible, that together no one alive could touch them, least of all someone like me. Kane threw in that getting carried away was my weakness, not theirs. Rachel stood at the center of it all and threw her voice out over the stands with a touch of magic, so every seat heard the rules. Fight until one side yields or can't go on. Then the stakes, spoken plain to 20,000 ears, lose, and I went back to the hero party in service. Lose, and the twins gave up 300 gold and left me alone forever. Then she added, cheerfully, that she had a small confession. There was nothing in the world she loved more than watching an arrogant man lose in front of a crowd and ruin himself doing it. She could feel someone very full of himself standing on this sand today, and she could hardly wait to see how it ended. The twins pointed straight at me and howled that she meant me, and for half a breath, I'll admit it, the old doubt cracked open. Maybe I had gotten carried away. Maybe I'd walked out here too sure of a thing I hadn't earned. Ada's elbow found my ribs. Don't take a single word from those two seriously, master, she said, not even looking at them. The crack closed. I remembered exactly who I'd built, and exactly what I'd built her to do. Rachel raised one arm, then she dropped it, and the whole arena drew its breath at once. Kirk moved before the echo of her arm faded. An archer's cheap opener, an arrow straight for my throat before the first heartbeat of the match was done. I didn't flinch. I'd supported this man for years. I knew that shot the way I knew my own name. Ada's hand came up and closed on the arrow a finger's width from my neck. She plucked it out of the air like a thread off a coat. The whole arena went silent, then broke apart screaming. "Just as you predicted, Master," she said. "Exactly." I sent her at Kirk and took Kane for myself. Ada crossed the sand at a speed the crowd couldn't track, and Kirk emptied his quiver into her path. Every arrow batted aside before it reached her, one after another, gone. She drove him back toward the far wall and out of my mind. I trusted that ending completely. Kane squared up on me, sword out, telling the stands about his glory days as a swordsman, his gold rank steel, all the ways he was about to send me flying. I let him talk. Then I raised one large battle golem out of the sand between us. Kane's punchline died in his mouth. The golem's fist caught him square and threw him across the sand with a yell the crowd would be quoting for weeks. He rolled up, poured a heel into himself, green light knitting him whole, and went at the golem in earnest. 3 strikes, his triple slash, and my golem came apart in a shower of packed earth. He turned to gloat. The gloat was a mistake, because the first golem had never been the point. It was a decoy, built to eat exactly that finisher, and while he spent it, I'd already been shaping the rest. The sand around him heaved and rose, and 10 more battle golems stood up out of it in a ring. All of them turned inward, all of them looking at one man. Kane laughed too high and swore he could handle 10, 20, 100 of my mud dolls. The nearest golem slapped the sword out of his grip. The rest closed the ring and bore him down and pinned him flat. 10 pairs of earthen hands holding him against the sand while the crowd came up out of its seats. I gave him the out. "Kane," I called, "that's enough. I don't want to hurt you more than I have to." Yield, he wouldn't. Pinned under half a ton of golem with his face going white, he spat that this was nothing, a massage, that I should stop being gentle and hit him like I meant it. So I took him at his word. I reached into the ring and released the limiters, the governors I'd set on every one of those golems to keep them soft. 10 machines built for one honest burst of force stopped holding back all at once. The pressure came down. The bravado went out of him between one breath and the next, and Kane sagged into the sand and did not get up. Ada came back across the field at an easy walk, dragging Kirk by the collar behind her, out cold, his bow still in his slack hand. She let him down next to his brother and dusted off her palms. "Finished on my end too, Master," she said. Rachel's voice rolled out over the stands. Kane could not continue. Kirk could not continue. The winners were Nathan and Ada. The arena came down like a landslide. I should have felt lighter. Mostly, I felt every eye in the building landing on me at once, and a small cold thought about how much attention a golem hand really wanted at the guild. A guild healer knelt and brought the twins back to their senses. 2 receptionists came out carrying a bag between them, heavy enough to sag their arms. 300 gold and the papers that made it mine. For one honest second, I thought of the 2 broke men on the sand and wondered whether I ought to hand half of it back. Rachel caught the thought on my face before I moved and shut it down flat. "No, Nathan," she said. "That's all yours. Let people claw money back after a settled duel and the whole system rots. If you truly don't want it, donate it to the guild, but you do not give it to them." The twins didn't take defeat well. They came off the sand loud, insisting they hadn't lost at all. They'd only been resting their eyes. The match wasn't over. They weren't paying a single coin. And when that got no traction, they reached for the worst thing they could think of. They accused Rachel of taking a bribe from me, a crooked call from a crooked referee. "Bribe judge," they chanted at her, over the crowd's boos. "Unfair, void, we're not paying." Rachel's smile went away. She told them, still pleasant, that those were words she couldn't let slide. She would answer them adventurer style, a duel, the 2 of them against her. If they won, the guild itself would cover their lost 300 gold. If she won, they accepted the result and shut their mouths. Free money and a fresh fight against one small woman. The twins couldn't agree fast enough. Kirk backed off across the sand to an archer's distance. Kane drew his sword and charged her where she stood. She hadn't taken up any weapon. She hadn't even taken a stance. Just stood there, hands loose, unreadable. Then there was a sound like a wall coming down, and Kane was in the far barrier. I never saw it. One instant he was mid-swing 3 strides from her. The next he was folded against the arena wall, out cold, his sword ringing on the sand. Where Rachel had been standing there was a footprint pressed into the packed ground, a shallow crater in the shape of one bare heel. Ada told me quietly what my eyes had missed. Just before Kane's sword came down, Rachel had stepped in and put a single punch through him at a speed no human eye could follow. The first sound, the wall falling sound, that had only been her foot leaving the ground. Rachel rolled her shoulder and told the stands, like it was nothing, that her adventurer class was Master Monk, the highest rung of the monk line. In some years, she added, not one person alive qualifies for it. Kirk was 100 paces off across the oval, right where an archer wants to be, and he thought that distance made him safe. A monk's fists couldn't reach him out here, he shouted, and he drew and loosed with everything he had straight at her chest. Rachel clapped her hands together once and called a name into the open air. Peep! The light changed first. The sun seemed to double, and the air over the arena went to shimmering heat, and then it came down out of the glare. An enormous bird made of living flame. Wings spread wider than the gate we'd walked through, trailing a long banner of fire behind it. Its eyes, 2 points of molten gold. The heat rolled off it in a wave I felt in my teeth from across the sand. Kirk's arrow burned to nothing in the air a long way from its heat, gone before it ever came close. He panicked. He fired again and again, faster and wilder, and every shaft flared up and dropped as ash the moment it entered the Firebird's air. Not one reached her. The crowd wasn't screaming anymore. They'd gone quiet, the way people go quiet in front of something holy. Rachel patted the great burning creature's flank like it was a farm dog. Her other class, she told us, was Tamir, a wholly separate art from the monks, and this was what she'd tamed, a divine beast, the phoenix. She kept the legend on a leash and called it by a name you'd give a chick. Kirk threw down his bow so fast it bounced. He was done, he shouted. They gave up. They were beaten. Please? The phoenix folded its fire back into the light and was gone, and the sun was only the sun again. The match was over for real this time, and the whole arena said so at once. I stood there holding a bag of 300 gold I'd won with a plan and a companion, next to a woman who'd just ended a platinum archer with a bird, and I felt very small and very aware of it. Rachel saw the look and waved it off. Overseeing duels sometimes meant refereeing heroes, she said, so she had to be strong enough to stand over them. And as for where she sat among the 13 heroes of the world, she put herself right around the middle. There were beings walking around who made what I'd just seen look ordinary. I said the honest thing. Please stop, you're overselling me. She laughed at that. From where she stood, she said, I was the exceptional one, not her. She'd wager I'd pass her inside a month. I didn't believe her. I said so. But she said it the way she'd set the wager the night before, like a woman who already knew how the thing ended and was only waiting for the rest of us to catch up. And she left it hanging there in the air over the sand, a mark on a wall set far above my head, daring me to reach it. The twins gathered up their unconscious selves and their empty pockets and went. And this time, they didn't look back. And I understood that the one thing I'd actually wagered for was mine now. They would leave me alone. I hefted the gold. It was heavy and it was clean. And I hadn't begged anyone for a coin of it. Somewhere behind me, a hero was still smiling like she'd planted something. Ahead of me, the crowd was chanting a name that had started the day as a cast-off golem hand. I kept my head down and walked for the gate, and I did not let the sound get into my chest because I had watched exactly what pride did to the people it swallowed, and I had no intention of being the next thing it ate. The whole city was still saying my name when I closed the door on it. I had taken the smallest room the tavern kept, up under the eaves. One candle and a fire burned down to embers. After a day spent in front of 20,000 shouting people, the quiet felt like a heavy coat I could finally take off my shoulders. I did not want a crowd. I wanted a plate of food and a door that shut. Ada sat across the little table with a steak between us. I had promised her that celebration 3 separate times and let the world interrupt it 3 separate times. So tonight I bought the biggest cut the kitchen had and watched her eat it one careful bite at a time. Ada lifted the first piece on her fork and studied it before it ever reached her mouth. It is warm all the way through. That is generally the idea, I said. She set the fork down. Master is not eating. I told her I was. I wasn't. Much. I was turning my own hands over in the candlelight instead. The calluses, the little burn scars. The ink worked so far into the creases, it never fully washed out. All day, I had beaten trained killers with nothing but packed earth and patience, and one stubborn thought kept circling back. Nobody in that arena had taught me a single thing I used out there. Only one person ever had, and she lived a long way north of the city, in a village so small it did not sit on most maps, and I had not gone back to see her in years. I could picture the place without even trying. North of the city, past all the farm country, there's a village where the evenings come down slow and blue, and at the edge of it, a cottage that holds more books than shelves. The woman who lives there is named Vera. She is in her 60s now, gray hair pinned up in a bun, small round spectacles. She is forever pushing back up her nose, a green wool robe worn so long it has taken the shape of her. She is the village scholar. For a full day's walk in any direction, she is the one person alive who can read the old dead scripts, and she spends her nights bent over cracked pages by lamplight, coaxing meaning out of languages that stopped being spoken 1,000 years ago. Lately, I knew, The work had felt emptier than it used to, not harder, just quieter. For a few good years, she had read those pages aloud to somebody who leaned in for every word. Then, that somebody grew up and left for the wider world, and the lamp still burned, and the pages still turned, and the chair beside her stayed empty. That somebody was me. I was 10 years old the first time she read to me about golems. The other children in the village wanted swords or spells, the loud, bright things. I wanted the books nobody else could open. Vera would sit me on a stool by her window and read the old golem research aloud. How the ancients pressed a kind of life into packed earth. How a core worked like a heart, and a lattice worked like a set of bones. And I would sit there barely breathing, because it was the first thing in the whole world that had ever made complete sense to me. Listening was not enough for long. I begged her to slow down over the diagrams. I dragged mud across her spotless floor and built lumps that sagged apart before they finished. My first real golem stood about knee-high, crooked, one arm shorter than the other, and it managed a single wobbling step across her boards before it crumbled straight back into dirt. Vera clapped like I had raised a cathedral. Then I got better, fast, faster than she could quite keep pace with, she admitted to me once. She would translate a page late at night, and by the following evening, I had already built the thing described on it and improved on the design. A woman who had spent her whole life among silent dead texts suddenly had those texts walking around her kitchen. I think that startled her almost as much as it delighted her, but I never built them just to walk around a kitchen. There was an old woman at the end of our lane whose legs had long since gone bad. Every market day, she would carry her baskets a half-mile on hips that could barely hold her up, resting every few steps, arriving worn out before her day had even started. So I built her a golem. Nothing grand, a squat, patient thing with broad, low arms, made to shoulder her whole load and walk at her pace and never faster, so she never once had to hurry to keep up with it. The first morning it followed her down the lane, carrying everything she owned to bring to market. She stopped in the middle of the road and cried. I did not understand it yet. I was a boy who had solved a problem, and I was a little confused that solving it had made her weep. It took me years to work out that to her, I had not solved a problem at all. I had handed back a piece of her own life she had quietly decided was gone for good. After that, they started coming to me, quietly, the way people ask for things they are not sure they are allowed to want. There was a young woman who could not walk at all. Her chair had to be pushed, and there was not always somebody free to push it. So she spent long hours parked wherever she had last been left, waiting on the kindness of whoever passed. I built her a golem that walked behind the chair with its hands always steady on the grips, sure-footed over the stones, and gave her back the simple thing of choosing where she went and when she went there. Then the whole village shared one well, and hauling water up out of it was somebody's aching back every single day of the year. So I built a golem to draw it. Down went the bucket, up came the water, dawn to dusk, tireless and uncomplaining. None of these things were weapons. Not one of them would have lasted a heartbeat in the arena I had just walked out of. But back home, they would tell you my craft was the most useful thing the village had, and they kept every golem I ever built oiled and mended like family. Because in a place that small a machine that carries your water is not really a machine. It is a neighbor. And then there was the one I built for her. It was only a practice piece, I told myself at the time. Small enough to sit on a shelf. A little rounded golem, no taller than a loaf of bread, with careful hands and exactly one job. It made coffee. That was the whole of it. It ground the beans. It heated the water. It poured a cup at the exact hour of evening she liked to stop reading, and it set that cup down by her elbow without ever once spilling a drop. I made it because she always forgot to eat or drink when she was deep in a difficult text, and I wanted something to look after her on the nights I could not. I gave it to her on an ordinary evening and walked home to bed and never thought about it again as anything more than a toy. Here I have to tell you something I only learned much later, secondhand, and believe completely. That night, after the boy had gone home, Vera sat a long time with the little golem's cup warming her hands. She had spent 40 years among the writings of the dead, chasing the brilliance of a civilization long since turned to dust, and she had made a quiet peace with the idea that all the great minds were safely behind her in the past, where she could only read about them and never meet one. And here was one, 10 years old, with mud still under his nails, who had listened to her read and then gone home and built a small kind thing so that a lonely old woman would remember to drink her coffee. She set the cup down and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and let herself be foolish about it for a while. That boy, she said to the empty room, to the fire, to nobody at all, that boy really was something. She still has it. Out of everything in that cottage crammed with priceless ancient books, the little coffee golem is the one thing she calls her greatest treasure. Not for anything it does, for who was thinking of her when he made it. There was one promise between us that I never let myself forget. Among all her old texts, one of them described a place, the deepest dungeon in the world, a floor so far down that no one in living memory had ever reached it, where the ancients were said to have left behind their greatest work. Vera talked about that place the way other people talk about heaven. She knew she would never see it herself. She was a scholar, not a fighter, and for anyone who was not truly extraordinary, going down that far was simply a slow way to die. So I told her I would take her there myself. Someday, when I was good enough, I would come back for her, and the two of us would go all the way down to the very bottom together, and she would finally read the writing carved on those walls with her own eyes, instead of dreaming over somebody else's secondhand copy. She laughed and said that it was a promise then. I do not think either of us fully believed it. It was the kind of thing you say to a bright child to watch him glow. But I meant every word, and some small part of her let herself hope, and we shook hands on it like it was written into law. I like to think that most evenings now she pours herself a small drink, lets the coffee golem tend the cup beside it, and wonders how far the boy has gotten by now. She would have no way of knowing, no way to hear that a genuine hero had told a packed arena I would surpass her within a month, or that the very craft the village loved had just humbled a pack of trained killers in front of a roaring crowd. None of that reaches a village at the end of the maps. All she has is the boy who used to sit on her stool, and the thing she wants is not the hero and not the crowd. What she wants is for me to walk back up that slow blue lane some ordinary evening, sit down in the empty chair, and tell her everything. She never said it to me straight out, but I think if she could send a single word out into the world after me, it would not be great and it would not be famous. It would be simpler than that. If any of you out there meet that boy, please be kind to him. He was always kinder than the world ever bothered to be to him. Back in the little room, the candle had burned down to almost nothing. The people who threw me out had a word for what I do: useless. They said it to my face so many times that somewhere underneath, I had started to wonder if they were right. And then today, a whole stadium of strangers had screamed the exact opposite. And if I am honest, neither the insult nor the cheer had ever really reached the place where I actually keep myself. But Vera had never once called me useless. Not when my first golem crumbled apart on her floor. Not on any day after. She had looked at a muddy 10-year-old and seen somebody worth reading to. And sitting there in the candlelight, I finally understood that I had aimed myself wrong all this time. I had thought I was climbing to prove the people who discarded me wrong. I was not. I was climbing for the woman who taught me to read what was written on my own manual. A promise is one of the very few things I know of that does not break. Cores crack, old spells fray, proud men fall. But the word I gave her has held for years now, without a single hairline running through it, and I mean to keep it whole all the way to the bottom of the world. Ada, I said, when we are done here, when I am strong enough to bring somebody down to the deepest floor and back out alive, we are going to go and visit someone. She tilted her head at me. Who, master? I pulled the stub of the candle a little closer. The person who made me, long before I ever made you. Then I leaned in and blew out what was left of the flame. Somewhere far to the north, a lamp was still burning over an open book, and for the first time since the day they threw me away, the long road in front of me did not feel like revenge at all. It felt like going home the long way around. The morning after we put the twins down on the arena floor, Ada and I went back to the guild for the dull part of the job. To reach gold rank, you need contribution points and 10 social service quests, the small civic work that keeps a town running: weeding, ditch clearing, hauling. I had been picking them off one at a time. That morning, the board had exactly one left, and had been pinned there so long the paper had gone soft at the corners. Adamantite, raw ore, mined out of Ashmount volcano. The receptionist saw where my eyes landed and came around the desk fast. Nobody took that one, she warned me. People died on it. Heat past 50 degrees, gas that vented without warning, monsters in the tunnels. Ore so heavy, no cart could reach it. Every year the mountain kept a few of the ones who tried. Please, she added, not that one. Ada leaned over the counter and read it twice. It's fine. I'm a golem, she said. Heat doesn't bother me until 200 degrees. Gas doesn't touch me at all. She counted the dangers off on her fingers like a grocery list, and one by one, they stopped being dangers. The receptionist opened her mouth to argue, then shut it. She looked at Ada again, really looked, and her whole face changed. Oh, she murmured. Come to think of it, you really could just walk it back, couldn't you? That easy. a quest that killed people every year, handed across a counter because the person taking it couldn't be cooked or poisoned. We spent the afternoon buying what the mountain asked for: a pickaxe, climbing boots for the loose slope, a heat-proof pack to carry ore that would scorch an ordinary bag through. Ada shouldered all of it like it weighed nothing. At dawn, I walked her to the edge of the district. It was a 2, maybe 3-day trip up and back, and she would be doing it alone. She told me to stay home and rest. "I'll be a little lonely," she admitted. "But I can't have you fretting over me the whole time, Master." Then she turned and went, and I stood in the empty road feeling the exact shape of being left behind. So I did what I always do when I cannot sit still. I went home and started building. The mountain was not a fighting problem. It was a mechanical one. Heat, weight, bad air, and mechanical problems are exactly the kind my craft was made for. A person could not survive up there. A thing built right would never even notice. So I built the thing, not an instant golem. Those come without a frame, quick and hollow, good for one hard job and then dust. This one had to last. It had to haul, to take a monster's charge in a tunnel and keep digging. I gave it a real skeleton and packed it heavy, 3 meters tall when it stood, reinforced through the shoulders and arms, plated against heat, made to swing a pick all day and turn and fight if the dark turned on it. Somewhere in the second night, working the seam where the frame wanted to flex, I caught myself grinning. I never learned to swing a sword, but I always knew which seam a thing would fail at first and how to build one that never would. 3 days later, it opened its eyes at the foot of Ashmount, and Ada was there waiting. The volcano climbed up in front of us in black steps, the air over it bending with heat. No road, no cart, just a long walk into the part of the world that killed people. I woke the golem. It rose to its full height, dim eyes lighting, and stood waiting for a task the way my golems always do. Ada clapped her hands together, delighted. "Then, Master, I'll take it up and run its test." I watched the two of them start the climb, Ada in front, light on her feet, the great heat-plated thing lumbering behind her like a younger brother 3 times her size. I felt that warm, foolish pride a maker gets. Then they went up into the haze, and I sat down at the bottom of a mountain that had never once let a person do that and waited. 3 days later, they came back down. The golem came first, and it was carrying a mountain of its own. Adamantite stacked and strapped across that reinforced frame, more raw ore than I had ever seen in one place. It had walked into the thing that kills adventurers every year and simply worked, and now it was walking out with the mountain's insides on its back. Ada was beaming, not a scratch on either of them. I ran my hand over the hull, dark, dense, heavier than it had any right to be, the exact stuff blacksmiths starve for. We had far more than the quest asked. We had more than the quest asked many times over. All I had to do now was find the shop that wanted it. The shop I wanted had posted the Adamantite quest itself. I heard it before I reached the door, 2 men shouting over the ring of a hammer. A young smith, broad and sweating, stood at the anvil. His father, older, loomed over him, telling him he was clumsy, unskilled, wasting his life at that forge. "Quit," the old man kept saying. "Give it up." The son would not. He would succeed his father, he swore back. He would make this shop the biggest in the country. Then, the old blacksmith did the thing that was meant to end it. He rapped a knuckle against his own right leg, and it rang wrong. Wood, not bone. He had lost the leg years back in an adamantite accident on that very volcano, and it had taken his trade with it because he could no longer brace himself to work the iron. That was why he had once told the boy he had talent, and now called all of it a lie. He would rather smash the dream than bury the boy. The son would not hear it. The argument tipped into shoving, 2 stubborn men gripping each other's collars, each of them shouting the same love in the shape of a fight. And the father threw out the line he thought could not be answered. Was there anyone alive who could just carry adamantite home safe while a smith sat and waited? That was about when I pushed the door open. "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt," I said. 2 heads turned. I stepped in with the golem filling the doorway behind me and told them as plainly as I could that I had built a thing that could bring adamantite down off the mountain without a single person going near the heat. Would they care to use it? Behind me, Ada rolled the cart in. The pile of black ore came into the light. The father's unanswerable question had just been answered out loud by a stranger at his door, while the exact impossible thing he had named sat steaming on a cart in front of him. Neither man made a sound. The son's mouth hung open. The old man only stared at the ore as if it might vanish the moment he blinked. The old man came back to himself first. He took out a lens and bent over the ore, turning pieces to the light, and his hands were not quite steady. It was real, all of it. Then he did the arithmetic and went pale. One quest asked for a set amount of ore. We had brought 300 times that. It counted as completing his posted quest 300 times over, and the golem had done half of it alone in a single trip. 150 runs worth of a job that kills people in one walk down a mountain. The old man went into the back and dragged out the shop's entire safe and set it on the counter because that was what the delivery was worth. The son could not take his eyes off the golem. "It's amazing," he kept saying. "Hugo." I learned his name in the middle of him, nearly shaking my arm loose. 150 quests in one go, and safely. And how much for it? He would pay anything. Here is the truth. I had built it for fun. I had never once thought about a price. When he pressed me, I almost asked for the cost of the materials, about 3 silver coins, and I could see him getting ready to be insulted by the number. So I looked at the safe he had just emptied and thought better of taking his coin at all. "How about a trade instead?" I offered. "Something from the shop." I pointed at a plain sword worth those same 3 silver. Ada's old blade was a cheap beginner's thing, and a straight swap felt fair to me. Hugo looked genuinely pained. "That sword was far too cheap," he protested, and he pulled down the finest blade in the shop instead and pushed it into my hands and would not hear another word. So I traded a golem for the best sword the family made, and then, since I was already asking, commissioned a set of light armor for Ada on top of it. Hugo swore he would forge it himself. Ada turned the new sword over in the light, pleased as anything. A good day's work, I thought. And that was when the old man, who had gone quiet with his arms folded, asked me to step into the back room a moment, alone. I thought I had done something wrong. A stern man, a private room, the door pulled shut behind us. I braced for a complaint. Instead, the old blacksmith lowered himself down onto the floor in front of me, bad leg and all, and pressed his forehead to the boards and wept. For a moment, I have to leave my own side of it and stand in his, because something broke loose in that man that had been held shut for years. He had watched the mountain take his leg and end his trade, and every day since he had watched his son walk toward that same mountain with the same love in his hands, and he had made himself cruel on purpose, mocked the boy, called his gift a lie, tried to kill the dream because a crushed dream heals and a dead son does not. He had chosen his son's hatred over his son's grave, and now a stranger had walked in and made the mountain harmless, and the whole terrible bargain he had built his life around simply fell away, and there was nothing left to do with all that held back love but set it down on the floor. "Thank you," he said, and his voice came apart in the middle of the word. "Thank you. Now I can hand the shop to my boy and not lie awake waiting for that mountain to take him too." I always knew he had it in him, better than me, and I told him to quit anyway, because I was so afraid. He pressed his head lower and told me he owed me a debt he could never repay, and that anything I ever needed for the rest of his life was already mine. I did not know what to do with a grown man kneeling on the floor, thanking me for a hobby. I got him up as gently as I could. I had built a machine because building machines is the thing I love. I had not known I was handing a father back his son, but standing in that little room with him gripping my hand in both of his, I felt a warm, quiet pride I had never once felt from a rank or a coin. The plain fact that the thing I made had been worth making. I heard the rest of it later, secondhand. I will admit I did not mind hearing it. While a father was thanking me on his back room floor, the twins were across town at a bar, drunk and broke again, loudly deciding that whatever had gone wrong in their lives was somehow my fault. 2 women sat down beside them. One tall and red-haired with a great sword across her back, bright and chatty. One small and black-haired, who spoke in something near a whisper. The brothers took one look and decided out loud that their luck had finally turned. The older one called the tall one for himself. The younger claimed the small one, and both of them grandly offered to buy the ladies anything they liked. The red-haired one waved the drinks off. "No thanks," she said, cheerful as sunrise. "We're just here to collect on you two." They were from the guild's debt collection department. Greta, the red-haired one, explained it kindly, the way you would walk someone through a chore. The brothers still owed 2,000 gold for the party golem they had broken, a debt a court had already ruled on. The good cheer drained out of both faces as they finally remembered it existed. They tried the only card they had. They had no money, so they could not pay, so surely that was the end of it. They had already handed over 130 gold and the deed to their house. There was nothing left to squeeze. Greta only smiled wider. Not paying, she told them, did not make a court's ruling vanish. It just meant they would work it off instead, and that was exactly what the debtors' hall was for. That was when the brothers bolted for the door. They did not reach it. The small one, Mona, the curse user, lifted a hand and murmured something soft, and a thin band of light looped their ankles and folded them both neatly down onto the tavern floor. No harm in it, just enough to settle the fact that there was no running lane out of this one. Cornered on the boards, the fight went out of them. They would work, they blurted, however long it took. Just go easy. Mona read out the terms in her whisper. A binding work contract, a fixed term of plain labor at the debtors' hall until the golem damage was paid clean. Greta clapped one of them on the shoulder and welcomed them aboard to their new career. They were marched off into the dark, wailing about their rotten luck the whole way, still not once asking whether the luck had been theirs to waste. I did not gloat over it. I did not need to. Not so long ago, these two had trailed me around the guild looking for a purse to shake loose, and now they were bound for a work hall to pay off a machine they broke out of spite. The mountain that maimed the blacksmith and the arena that ruined the twins were the same world, really, just sorting people by what they had actually built and what they had only ever wrecked. The debt the hero and her party still carried had not come due yet, but the ground was tilting now, and everything careless was starting to roll downhill toward the bottom. The twins had simply reached it first. I went home a golem short, with a fine sword to hand to Ada, and a father's promise I never asked for. By any measure I cared about, it had been a very good week. The whole lobby was one shouting knot when I walked in, and that was never a good sign. I found the receptionist behind her counter, pale, waving me over before I'd even asked. An emergency quest had just gone up, she told me. Every other job in the building was frozen until it was done. What kind of emergency needs the whole guild? I asked. A plague, she said. It had broken out at the edge of town, and the only medicine that touched it needed one ingredient: the horns of the rainbow lizard. She spread her hands like the problem was already sitting on the counter between us. The lizards changed color to match anything, weak as kittens, and almost impossible to find. Half the guild was already out in the trees, and not one of them had bagged a single horn. I looked at Ada. Ada looked back at me, calm as a still pond, ready for whatever I decided. We'll take it, I told the counter. Come on, Ada. Let's fill the whole quota before dark. The receptionist bowed so low her hair nearly hit the wood. I was already turning for the door. Fernwood was an easy dungeon, and today it was full of adventurers on their hands and knees, cursing at empty bushes. A lizard would sit right in front of a man and simply stop being a color he could see. You don't beat camouflage by looking harder. You beat it by not using your eyes at all. Scout form, Ada. Light rolled over her, and when it faded, a pair of tall ears rose from her silver hair, turning like they had a mind of their own. It was a plain, working shape, built to hear, nothing more. She went still, tipped her head, and pointed at a shrub 20 paces off that looked like every other shrub. Master, this form hears everything, she said, delighted. There, in that one. I dropped 10 little golems out of the dirt around it, knee-high and stupid and quick, and they closed the ring before the lizard even knew it had been found. One clean catch. After that, it was a harvest. Ada walked the forest by sound, calling them out one bush at a time, and my diggers boxed each one in. By the time the light went gold, we had 40 of them bagged, while grown men around us were still arguing with empty leaves. Nobody gasped when we hauled 40 lizards to the delivery counter. They'd started to expect it from me, which was its own strange feeling. Ada and I cut the horns and stacked them. I kept the bodies. There was a new form in them if I worked at it, and I wanted Ada to have more options than fire. She lit up at the promise of it. Then the receptionist put a hand over her mouth and started to cry. It caught me flat. Between one horn and the next, she got the words out. Her little brother had caught the plague too. They'd given him a week. Now, because the medicine would be made in time, he was going to live. Thank you, Nathan, she managed. You don't know what you just... And then she couldn't finish. I waited with Ada while she pulled herself back together. When she had, I told her the other thing I'd found down there. Deep in the dungeon, a whole stretch where the monsters had cleared out, as if something had frightened them off. At the center of it, a pit. And out of the pit, slow and heavy, a heartbeat. She went stiff. A few minutes at the records, and she had a name for it. The Bronze Arm Grizzly. A year back, she said, it had come up hungry out of its sleep and walked into the city. A giant bear plated in bronze that threw off every blow, fire worst of all. 3 platinum rank adventurers had gone at it and been beaten back, and the thing barely scratched. In the end, the guild simply ran, emptied the district while the bear ate its way through the market, and the season now matched the season then. It's waking, I said. I heard it. She squared her shoulders, and her voice changed into something official. From this moment, she declared, the emergency subjugation of the Bronze Arm Grizzly was open, and the leader of the operation would be the most trusted adventurer in the building. Then she said my name. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. An hour later, 17 of us stood in the lobby. Every silver rank and up the guild could scrape together, and me, somehow at the front of them. The receptionist told me to explain the plan. Before I could, A huge middle-aged man in Paladin's plate shoved forward, a battered shield up on one arm, and announced he wouldn't follow some young punk. If I wanted to stand over him, I'd have to prove it. He held the shield out and told me to hit it with everything I had. "Go ahead, Ada," I said. "Just don't overdo it." She stepped in and tapped it. One knuckle, barely a swing, and the old shield folded inward with a deep bronze bong. The Paladin froze. Then he whooped, spun on his heel, and went pounding around the lobby, holding the dented shield over his head for everyone to admire. A young monk woman trotted after him, laughing, and apologized on his behalf between breaths. Their idiot leader wasn't picking a fight, she explained. He was my biggest fan, and far too embarrassed to just ask a girl for a souvenir to his face. She shook my hand hard enough to rattle my teeth. A sharp-eyed young man drifted over next. He'd been out of town, he said, missed the arena business people kept mentioning, didn't know me from anyone, but he'd seen the mountain of rainbow lizards I brought in, and that told him enough. He'd follow my lead. I tried, honestly, to hand the whole thing off. I asked if anyone with real command experience wanted it. A gold rank veteran stepped up, gray at the temples, easy grin, a swordsman named Zane. He offered to take over as leader, and the room accepted him in a heartbeat. "Good," Zane said, loud, spreading his arms. "First order as your leader. Everyone, myself included. We follow Nathan. Any objections?" "None," the room roared. I stared at him. The receptionist, off to the side, gave him a small thumbs up. He'd handed the job right back to me with a bow on it, and there was no untangling it now. "Leave the fine details to me," he murmured. "You'll do this better than anyone. Old veterans here if you trip." Ada, beside me, said she'd handle any calculations I needed, so I stopped fighting it. I turned to the 17 and told them the only thing I actually cared about. "Then follow me. We put this bear down, and we do it without losing a single one of us." The lobby shook with the cheer. Before we marched, Hugo made good on his promise. The adamantite light armor he'd forged for Ada came finished, dark and close-fitting, and she buckled it on over the white dress without a word of complaint. Now the fine sword at her hip had proper plate to go with it. We reached the dead zone, and I put the plan on the ground where everyone could see it. Pits, a lot of them. I poured extra power into 2 full-size golems and set them digging, and the whole party stopped to watch. One big man who prided himself on his strength admitted the golems were tearing through the earth 10 times faster than he ever could. Nobody argued. In a couple of hours, we'd cut better than 10 broad pitfalls in a rough ring around the mouth of the den, each one deep enough to swallow a wagon. Then Ada's ears, even without the scout shape, caught it first. "Master," she said quietly, "it's waking up." A sound came out of that cave like a mountain clearing its throat. "Open on it, Ada. Fire radiation mode." The light took her and left the flamethrower shape in its place. Her arm remade into a long belching maw. She hit the dark with a wall of flame. Flare blast, the same fire that had cooked a flare wolf down to ash. The bear walked straight through it. It came up out of the pit into the lantern light, and it was worse than the story. 4, maybe 5 meters of monster, every inch of it sheathed in dull bronze plate that shed the flames like warm rain. It didn't so much as flinch. Fire, the one thing 3 platinum adventurers had thrown at it a year ago, and it might as well have been breath on a window. Behind me, the line broke a little. I heard it, the quiet voices, the man asking if we could really do this, another saying he couldn't picture a win. Panic is just a crack, and cracks spread. "It's all right," I shouted, loud enough to cut it. Fire was never the plan. Stay calm, stick to what we dug, and this thing is already dead. It just doesn't know it yet. The line held. It steadied, then it hardened, and someone shouted back that with Ada and me here, there was no losing. Beside me, Zane just nodded, arms crossed. "Nicely done," he said. "Holding morale is a leader's job too. Figured I'd have to step in. Turns out you didn't need me. Armor is only ever as good as it seems." I'd been reading the bear since it climbed out. Not the plates, the gaps, the elbows, the shoulders, the soft hinge behind each knee where the bronze had to leave room to bend. That was where it wanted to give. I let it charge. It came at us in a bronze avalanche and dropped straight into the nearest pit, front half vanishing, upper body wedged and thrashing above the rim. Stuck. "Now, everyone, the joints, all of it, right now." The whole line let go at once. Arrows, thrown knives, forked lines of lightning, all of it hunting the gaps I'd called. Ada swapped back to armor and took up the heavy warbow no one else could draw, snapping shafts into the hinges of its shoulders like she was threading a needle. The bear roared and its swings came slower. Somewhere down the line, a man laughed in pure disbelief. We were actually pushing it back. It got its claws over the lip and started to haul itself out. Before it cleared, my 2 big golems slammed into its flank and drove it back down into the hole, and the ranged fire never stopped. Again it climbed. Again they tackled it under. Every time it tried to stand, the earth swallowed it and the arrows found the seams. I watched the bronze at its its shoulders start to loosen. Close enough. That's it, I said. Time for the last piece. I'd built 2 of them and told no one. A small golem, packed to the seams with everything that burns, its whole body glowing a dull furnace red, a walking charge with legs. Bombs don't care how thick your armor is, they care where you put them. Go, I told it, and pointed at the one place a shell can never plate over, the crown of its head. The little golem scrambled up the trapped bear's back, planted itself square between the ears, and I gave the word. The blast punched down into the dust, and the whole den flinched with it. When the smoke thinned, the grizzly was still roaring, but across the top of its skull, where no bronze had ever grown, the shell had split, a long, dark crack running deep. A door where a moment ago there'd been a wall. I let out the breath I'd been holding and told the line, quietly, that I had a second one just like it if we needed it. We wouldn't. That was the exact moment the hero arrived. Helena came striding in far too late, loud about it, announcing that now that she was here, everything would be fine, and she'd be taking command. She made straight for the fight. Half of us shouted at once, "The pits! Mind the pits! We dug them! They're everywhere!" She didn't hear a word. She marched right off the edge of the biggest one and dropped out of sight. I want to be fair. I truly did warn her. She hauled herself up out of the hole, filthy and furious, and, through her narration, I could only gather the gist, decided the trap I'd dug to kill a monster had been personally aimed at her. Then, rather than walk around the traps we kept pointing at, she tried to leap them in one heroic bound. She came down headfirst into a second, smaller hole and stuck there, wedged to the hips, 2 armored boots waving at the ceiling. The bear chose that instant to stir again. Beside me, the monk girl folded her arms and suggested, cheerfully, that we just leave the airhead where she was and finish the bear without her. She'd charged in without listening, after all. The paladin agreed that she'd dug her own hole, quite literally, and could sit and cool off. She was tough. She'd keep. Not one person moved to pull her out. For half a second, honestly, it was tempting, but I knew exactly what it felt like to be the one everybody agreed to leave behind. I wasn't going to become the people who'd left me. Nobody leaves her in a hole, I said. Finish the bear. I'll deal with her after. Ada, through the crack. End it. The light took her one more time into the flame shape, and she moved. She wove the whole field of open pits at a dead run, light on her feet as water, and came up under the bear's split skull. Then, she put every bit of her fire straight through the crack, into the one place the bronze had never covered. The bear went down and did not get up. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then, the whole line was shouting, hammering weapons on shields, and Ada turned to me with the widest smile I'd ever built. Yes, we did it, master. 17 adventurers, and every one of them walking home. The guild counted out my share afterward, 80 gold coins, enough to live easy for 10 years and more, along with the contribution credit and the bear's heavy shell, which Ada folded away into her storage like a blanket. Too heavy to wear. Good material all the same. The celebration was in full roar when the doors banged open and Helena walked in. She'd finally clawed herself out of her hole, sometime after the rest of us had left, by the look of her, and she was caked head to boot in dark earth, trailing dirt across the guild floor. The whole hall went quiet. She didn't want thanks, and she didn't want to sit down. She pointed at me and demanded a duel. I got the term secondhand, the way I get everything she says. If I won, she'd hand over Velabrand, the holy sword her proud house had carried for generations, the one thing that kept her a somebody. Losing it, from the way she spat it, meant disgrace and disowning, and nothing left. If she won, I'd repair her broken golem and crawl back to her party for good. Half of it I didn't want at any price, but the other half, the sword she was so sure she'd keep, told me she was betting the only thing she truly valued that she couldn't lose to me. A new voice cut in, light and amused. Rachel, the platinum arbitrator, had drifted over to preside, plainly enjoying every second of it. Whether I accepted, she said, was entirely up to me. So, what would it be? I looked at Helena, mud and all, and I knew exactly what I wanted out of this. Not her sword, not her golem work, just an ending. I'll do it, I said. On one condition. Win or lose, Helena never involves herself with me and Ada again. Ever. Rachel's grin widened. She bound the wager on the spot, Velabrand against my piece, and set the duel for 2 days from now, noon, at the arena. Then she told Helena, sweetly, that it would be quite a loss if she lost, and wished the hero her very best. Beside me, Zane let out a low whistle. Ada just squared up like the thing was already decided. 2 days, the arena, and the hero had staked the last thing she owned. 2 days after Helena staked the last thing she owned, my golem put on white armor and became a knight. Ada stood in the middle of the empty plaza and let the change run through her. Bands of pale light rolled up her body, and when they faded, she was wearing plated white armor over her dress. A longsword settled at her hip, standing the way a trained fighter stands. She called it her Valkyrie mode, a form built for the sword. I walked around her once, checking the seams the way I check everything I make. The plates are over 8 parts in 10 adamantite, I told her. The smith from the mining job forged them as a thank you, half the weight of normal armor, 5 times harder to break. She flexed one gauntleted hand and grinned at how light it felt. The armor I wasn't worried about. The armor was the best thing either of us had ever owned. What worried me was the arm inside it. Ada could swing a sword, but she had never been taught how. Not really. Not the way a hero is taught. So the day before, I had posted a quest at the guild, 2 gold rank swordsmen, one afternoon, to drill her before the duel. Good coin for easy work. Nobody came. We waited past the hour we'd set. We waited past the hour after that. The plaza stayed empty, and the 2 names on the board never turned up, and no message came to say why. That bothered me more than I let Ada see. Gold rank fighters don't skip guaranteed pay for nothing. Someone would have had to reach both of them, and pay both of them more, to make them quietly not exist on the one morning they were needed. For half a breath, I wondered if it was Helena. Then I let it go. Helena didn't scheme. Helena walked straight at whatever she wanted and swung. I'd watched her ignore 10 flagged pit traps and drop into 2 of her own party's holes in the same afternoon. Bribing men to vanish was 3 moves deeper than she had ever thought in her life. So it was someone else. Someone I couldn't see yet, who wanted my golem to walk into that arena untrained. I filed it away to chase later. There wasn't time to chase it now. We'd do it without the lesson, I said. Change of plan. You lead with magic, not the sword. Ada nodded once, and we went to the arena. The place was full to the walls. People were standing in the aisles because the benches had run out, and the noise came down onto the sand like weather. Half the town had come to watch a silver rank golem maker fight a hero, and every one of them thought they already knew how it would go. Helena came in from the far gate in her silver breastplate, the holy sword at her hip, her chin up. She looked at me across the sand and told the whole arena what she was going to do to me, that she'd crush me flat, break my little toy, and drag me back to her party to fix her golems for the rest of my life. She said it like it was already written down somewhere. I let her finish. Even against a hero, I said, I'm going to win. That was all she got from me. The crowd heard it and roared, because a maintenance man promising to beat a hero is either a fool or something they've never seen, and they'd paid to find out which. Rachel stepped between us on the sand with her arbitrator's badge catching the sun. She raised both wrapped hands, and the noise dropped enough for her to be heard. Under the dual arbitration office of the Adventurer Guild, she called. The terms are set. If Nathan and Ada win, Helena troubles them no more, and the Holy Sword Valibrand changes hands. She turned on her heel toward Helena. If Helena wins, Nathan goes back to her party as her repairman, for good. The stakes landed on the crowd and stirred it up all over again. A family sword against a man's freedom. It was a good show before it had even started. I stepped close to Ada while the noise covered us and put my mouth near where her ear would be. Lead with fire, I murmured. No swordplay unless you have to. You've never been drilled, and she's done nothing else her whole life. Don't hand her the one game she's sure to win. Understood, master, she said, quiet and certain. Across the sand, Helena was breathing hard through her nose, still chewing on the humiliation of the grizzly hunt, still sure the whole thing owed her a win. She wasn't reading the fight. She was just angry. Good, I thought. Anger walks straight at you. Straight lines are easy to plan around. Rachel threw her arm down and shouted the start, and both of them fired at once. Ada put a flare blast out of her open hand, a wide bar of white-hot fire that crossed the sand in a heartbeat. Helena answered with a giga fireball, a rolling ball of flame the size of a cart, and the 2 spells met dead center. The sand between them went to glass. The floor melted where the fire ground against fire, neither side giving, a seam of white heat holding in the middle of the arena while the crowd flinched back from the light. Then Ada leaned in. She told Helena exactly why while she did it, that this was for every night she'd worked me raw in the hero party, for every repair I'd done half asleep, because Helena couldn't be bothered to be careful with the things I made. I won't lose to you, she said, and poured more of herself into the fire. Her flame swallowed the seam and kept going. It ate straight through Helena's giga fireball, ran up the length of it, and struck the hero full on. Helena went off her feet and into the arena wall hard enough to crack it. Stone dust came down around her. The whole arena went silent for 1 full second. A hero had just lost a magic exchange to a silver ranks golem in front of all of them, and nobody had a word ready for it. I didn't move. I'd built Ada to be stronger than anything in this city, and this was only the first thing she was going to prove today. Helena came out of the broken wall furious. She'd learned one thing from the exchange, and it was the wrong thing. She decided magic wasn't the game. She'd close the distance and settle it with the holy sword, blade to blade, where a hero's training was supposed to win. She drew Valbrand and came at Ada across the sand. I wasn't going to let her have clean ground for that. I put my hand to the floor and pulled 5 golems up out of the arena sand between them. Big ones, packed dense and overbuilt through the arms, made to grab and hold. A wall of earth to slow a charging hero. The holy sword's real trick showed then. Valbrand takes magic and turns it into pure forward drive, and Helena burned power into it and became a thrown spear. She went through my 5 golems like they were standing still, blew clean past the last one, and reached Ada before I could set another wall. Her sword met Ada's, and Ada's fine blade shattered, snapped off a hand's width above the guard. The crowd made a sound. I felt it in my chest. Ada didn't back up. She held the broken stub of her sword like it was still a whole weapon and set her feet. "I'm fine, master," she called to me, not even glancing my way. "I can still fight." Helena took the broken sword as proof she'd already won. She stepped back, and then she opened her trump card, the technique her house had passed down with the holy sword, the one she'd been saving. Valbrand's drive fed her arm, and she threw 10 thrusts in a line so fast they landed as a single blur, the 1,000th thrust. I shoved a golem in front of Ada, one last body between her and the strike. The 1,000th thrust went through it and cut it into pieces before it hit the sand. 10 clean holes, and then nothing left to hold together. Helena reset for the next pass, certain the fight was closing. Then Ada spoke, and her voice was as level as if she were reading it off a page. "I've watched the trajectory of that technique up close," she said. "I have the whole shape of it now. It won't touch me again." I almost laughed. I'd built her to read motion, to watch how a thing moves and learn where it's going. Helena had just shown her the same 10-strike pattern twice. She'd handed my golem the one lesson those 2 missing swordsmen were supposed to teach. Helena didn't believe her. She threw the 1,000th thrust again, all 10 strikes, full speed, the holy sword screaming with drive. Ada parried everyone. She read them off their line, one after another, the broken stub of her sword turning each thrust aside before it reached her. Not by being faster, by knowing where each strike had to go before it went there. 10 hits came in, 10 hits went nowhere. When it was done, she stood exactly where she'd started, not a scratch on the white armor, the shards of stone settling around her boots. The crowd hadn't even finished gasping when she gave it back. Ada threw the 1,000th thrust herself, 10 strikes, the same murderous line, with a snapped off half of a sword and none of the holy blade's power behind it, just the shape she'd stolen out of the air. Helena had to scramble her own guard up to survive her own technique. She was using a legendary sword to barely block the move she'd invented, thrown back at her by a construct with a broken toy. The arena had stopped being a crowd. It was one held breath. They'd come to watch a hero put a repairman in his place, and instead, they were watching a repairman's creation give a hero her own legend back to her, sharper than she'd thrown it. I heard Helena's disbelief from across the sand, that without the holy sword, with a broken blade, Ada had reproduced the 1,000th thrust exactly. She said it wasn't possible. She said it the way people say things they need to be true. After that, it was only a matter of time, and time was the one thing Helena didn't have. She tired. Every clash cost her breath and drive, and she had to keep spending both just to stay level. Ada didn't tire at all. She doesn't. She met each attack fresh and pushed a step forward on every exchange, walking the hero backward across her own arena, patient as a clock. I'd spent my whole life learning where a thing wants to break, the hairline in a core, the seam in an old spell, the one weld a careless smith rushed. Standing there, I realized I was reading Helena the exact same way. A proud fighter who'd been handed a legendary sword at birth and never once been made to learn anything past the one move it did for her. That was her seam. Ada had found it in 2 passes and set her whole weight against it, and there was nowhere left for it to hold. Then Ada did something almost gentle. She tipped her head, telling Helena, "Look behind you. Aren't you forgetting something?" Helena had forgotten. The 5 golems I'd raised were never gone. They'd reformed behind her, while the swordwork held her eyes, and they closed the last of the distance in a heartbeat. One brought a flat, controlled edge of a hand down on the back of her head. No more force than it took. Nothing that would truly hurt her, just enough to snap her guard wide open. I built that stop into them on purpose. I wasn't going to become the people who'd thrown me away. She was going to lose. She wasn't going to be harmed. Her arms flew up and her chest was undefended, and Ada laid the broken blade against her throat. "The match is decided," Ada said. "Isn't it?" Rachel's voice rang out over the arena, calling it. The winners were Nathan and Ada. Helena wouldn't take it. Even with the match called, even with a stub of steel at her neck, she twisted and stabbed the holy sword at Ada in one last spiteful thrust. Ada parried it without looking. She didn't even turn her head. She turned the strike aside, stepped in along the hero's arm, and stripped the holy sword clean out of her grip. Valibrand spun once in the air and came down hilt first into Ada's waiting hand, as if it had always meant to end up there. She slid the legendary blade into her own scabbard, like it belonged to her now, because it did. The arena came apart with noise. Helena stood there without her sword. She was staring at her empty hand like the fingers belonged to someone else. This was the woman who had stood in the guild and called my life's craft a scam, who had torn my manual in half in front of the whole party and told me to get out because I was too weak to be worth feeding. Now she was on the arena sand with nothing in her hands, in front of the same public that had once believed every word she said about me. I didn't gloat. I want to be honest about that because I could feel the whole crowd wanting me to. I just watched it happen and let it be fair. Then Rachel made it worse for her and did it by the book. She drew a folded letter from inside her tunic, a letter already written, already sealed, waiting in her clothes before the duel even began. She'd known. Someone above her had known which way this was going to fall and had sent her in ready. Rachel broke the seal and read it out so the whole arena could hear, her playful voice gone flat and official. "By order of the guild master," she read, "for a record of failed dungeon subjugations run at a loss, for repeated destruction of guild-rented golems, for public disturbance and conduct unbecoming." She lifted her eyes to Helena over the top of the page. "Helena's qualifications as a hero are hereby stripped, revoked. As of this moment, you are no longer one of the 13. The word landed and the arena caught its breath. Stripped. Not demoted, not fined. Stripped. The title her whole proud house was built on, the thing she wore like it was her spine, read off a page in front of thousands and taken away in a single sentence. Helena broke. She'd come here certain she was days from a promotion, certain the guild would reward her, certain the story only ran one way for someone born as high as she was. Instead, she'd lost the duel, lost her family's sword, and lost the one word that made her Helena the hero, all in the span of a single afternoon, on the same sand, in front of the same faces. The crowd didn't cheer that part, even they went quiet for it. There's a kind of fall that's too complete to celebrate, and they felt it, and so did I. For most of my life, one word had followed me everywhere: useless. The party had said it, the twins had laughed it, and Helena had built a whole speech out of it the day she tore my manual in half and told me to go. The useless man, the one who couldn't hold a sword, only good for fixing what the real fighters broke. I'd carried that word so long it had gone quiet, the way an old ache does. And standing on that sand, watching the woman who'd branded me with it lose the last thing that made her more than anyone else in the room, I finally set it down. Not to hurl it back at her, just to be finished carrying it. She had called me too weak to keep. She'd been so sure of that, and the thing she threw away because it couldn't fight had just built the strongest fighter in the city and taken everything from her without my ever lifting a hand. I felt no joy in it, only that the scale had finally, exactly, balanced. Ada came and stood at my shoulder, the holy sword at her hip, and said nothing, because nothing needed saying. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Rachel turned away from the ruin of Helena and walked straight over to me, and there was that predator's grin back on her face, like she'd been holding a card all day and had finally reached the part where she got to play it. She held out a second letter. "There's a hero's seat empty now," she said. "The guild runs a selection exam in 1 week for recommended platinum rank adventurers." She pushed the paper into my hands. "I put your name in myself, Nathan. As far as I'm concerned, the adventurer most fit to be a hero right now is standing in front of me." I looked at the letter. I looked at her. "I'm silver rank," I said. "You need platinum to even enter, so become platinum." She shrugged like it was the easiest thing in the world. "You've got a week. For the man who did all this today, that's nothing at all." And something I'd buried a long time ago turned over in my chest. When I was a boy, before anyone told me what I couldn't be, I wanted to be a hero, not for the title, for the doors it opened. The 13 heroes each hold one of the great dungeons, and a hero can go where no one else is allowed to go. Down, all the way down, to the deepest floor I'd promised an old woman I would someday reach. I'd let that dream go years ago, quietly, the way you let go of things that only hurt to hold. And here was Rachel handing it back to me, folded into an envelope, like it had just been waiting for me to be ready. Not to spite Helena. She was already finished. This wasn't about her. This was the road I'd actually wanted, opening up in front of me for the first time. I closed my hand around the letter. "All right," I said. "1 week, I'll make platinum and I'll take the exam." The crowd heard it and came apart all over again, chanting it back at me. And beside me, Ada straightened up with the holy sword on her hip and looked at me like she'd known I'd say yes before I did. Platinum rank, 7 days. I'd been thrown out of a hero's party for being too weak to matter. Now I was going to go and become one myself. And this time, nobody was handing me the manual. I didn't learn his name until long after. When I finally did, a lot of things I had never understood snapped into place at once. The kind stranger, the torn manual, the morning my whole life turned over. So let me tell it to you now, the way it happened, in a room I was never standing in. A man sat with his legs crossed in the best room of the most expensive inn in the city. Full beard, easy smile, the smile of a man who has never once had to hurry. A young agent knelt in front of him and gave his report, and the report was bad news. The plan had failed. They had done everything right, bribed away the swordsmen who were meant to train Ada, kept her small, kept us weak on the day it mattered. And the man they had thrown out of a hero's party for being too soft to swing a blade had gone and beaten a hero anyway. The bearded man only clicked his tongue. He was far less troubled than the boy kneeling in front of him, and there was a reason for that. His name was Boyle, third-ranked man of the Golem Research Institute, a place that had spent 10 years bent over the bones of ancient golems, trying to wake one and failing every single time. They could not build what I built, so they had decided a long while ago to simply take the man who could. And here was the thing that made my blood go cold when I finally heard it. It was Boyle who had ended my old life. The kind stranger who wandered into my party's camp and told them golem upkeep was easy, that anyone could do it, that they didn't need me. That stranger had been his. The whisper that got my manual torn in half was his. He had found the exact place my old party wanted to come apart, and he had leaned on it until it did. Now, he had news of his own. The Institute had finally built a golem from scratch, a crude, borrowed, copied thing, but it moved. And with it, Boyle meant to walk up to me in the open, challenge me directly, and strip every secret I owned. He laughed about it, low and pleased, already spending power he didn't have yet. All of Nathan's craft in the Institute's hands, power to rival a whole nation. And behind him, above him, a director he answered to whose face I still hadn't seen. I was across the city that night, asleep, with no idea any of it existed. There were 2 of them coming for me now, the enemy I had already beaten, and the one I hadn't even met. 2 days after the duel with Helena, Ada and I took a job. Not for money, for points. The guild runs on contribution, and I needed a mountain of it fast. Gold rank takes points and an exam. Platinum takes points and a recommendation letter, and Rachel had already put that letter in my hand. So all that stood between me and platinum was a number on a ledger, and I knew exactly how to run a number up. We went to Hollow Deep Cave, a B-rank goblin dungeon 2 days out, and I brought help. For a long time, my instant golems had one problem. They ran on my mana, and I only had so much of me to spend. So I had stopped spending me. I crushed magic stones instead, poured the raw mana out of them and into the earth, and let the stones carry the cost, which meant I no longer had to build a golem or 2. I could build a wall of them. At the cave mouth, I knelt, pressed both hands flat to the ground, and pulled. The field came up in bodies. 30 of them stood first. Great rough-hewn things 3 yards tall, faceless, fists like millstones, dirt sheeting off their shoulders as they rose. Then 20 smaller ones scrambled up between their legs, quick and low and mean. 50 golems, breathing dust, filling the whole mouth of the cave, a force that could have flattened a small town, and it had cost me a sack of crushed stones and about a minute of quiet. Ada rolled her shoulders inside her white plate and drew Velabrand. "After you, master," she said. We went in together, and the goblins never had a chance to understand what walked in on them. Ada hit the front line like a falling star, the holy sword throwing her forward faster than the eye could hold, and the front line simply came apart. The archers on the high ledges got 2 shots off before she was among them. Behind her, my golems filled the tunnel wall to wall, and the goblin ranks, packed tight for a proper fight, had nowhere to break to. Stone fists came down. The dark did the rest. We cleared it the slow, careful way, Every branch we finished, I sealed behind us with a slab of packed earth so nothing could re-nest at our backs, and we gathered the magic stones off the fallen goblins to keep the army fed. Between the stones I'd bought in town and the ones we pulled here, the whole run would net me exactly nothing in coin. That was fine. I hadn't come for coin. Past the last sealed junction, the maps ran out. From here, it's unexplored, I told her. We go slow. We made camp in the dark with 3 golems stood around us as walls, a rough little fort of dirt and dim light. I ate and I slept. Ada didn't need either. She sat with Valibrand across her knees, watching the black mouth of the tunnel, and told me to close my eyes. "Leave the rear to me, master," she said, and I did. The next day, the tunnel opened into a hall the size of a cathedral, and at the far end sat the Goblin King. He was a monster, a good 3 meters of him, a great sword laid across his knees, a stone throne under him, and a wall of armed goblins packed around it. He saw us, and he stood, and he roared something in that broken, snarling speech of theirs, and the whole hall charged at once. I didn't move toward any of it. I never do. "Ada, take the king," I said. "Golems, everything else." She was already gone. The rest of the goblins folded into my golems like grain into a mill, but I barely watched that. I watched her. Ada crossed the hall in a breath and met the king as he brought that great sword down, and then she did a thing I had never seen her do. She had watched Helena's 1,000 thrust in the duel and kept it. Now she gave it back to the world with the holy sword behind it, and it wasn't 1,000 anymore. 34 strikes in a single second, a blur where her arm should have been, a sound like the whole hall being torn down the middle. Valibrand's light stitched the king through, over and over, faster than he could fall. She called it million thrust. The throne went first, then the stone behind it, then the king, who never landed a blow. When the light stopped and the dust came down, there was Ada, standing calm in her white plate with the sword lowered, and there was nothing left in front of her worth naming. The goblins that were still standing understood, finally, and tried to run. My golems closed the doors. By the time it was quiet, Hollow Deep Cave was empty of goblins from throne to mouth, and Ada was already sheathing Valibrand and asking if I'd slept enough. The receptionist read the completion slip twice. "Nathan," she said, "you always go straight past whatever we expect." A whole B-rank dungeon, cleared and sealed by 1 engineer and 1 companion. She stamped the ledger and told me the number had more than cleared the bar. "Pass the gold exam tomorrow, and you make gold, and then it's straight to platinum on that recommendation." Tomorrow then. I thanked her and left before she could ask how many golems it had taken. The gold exam had 3 parts, and the proctor running it was the same tired swordsman who'd watched me blow the practical field apart the first time. He waved the first test off before I'd even finished walking in. The practical was target destruction, and passing meant wrecking half of them inside the limit. I doubled that last time. He looked at me, looked at the targets, and told me flatly that he was not repairing those again, so we'd simply call it passed. I let him have that one. The written test I actually enjoyed. Monster lore, dungeon survival, adventurer ethics. I'd lived all of it in a hero's party for years. I walked out figuring I'd landed near 9 and 10 right, and the grade came back a pass. The last test was the one with teeth. They put me in a room with a man in a bed, flushed, sweating, groaning, and told me he'd just been hauled up from the depths of Ashmount Volcano, a place thick with poison gas and venom snakes. No magic allowed. Treat him. And the whole frame of it was screaming poison, antidote, hurry. Except the symptoms sat wrong. I knelt, checked him properly, and the picture didn't add up to venom. So I took the water bag off my belt and poured it straight over the man's head. "Master, what are you doing?" Ada blurted, which told me it looked as mad as it felt. Then I gave him the rest to drink. "This isn't poison," I said. "It's heat stroke. Cool him. Get water and salt in him. Let him rest. He'll be fine by morning." The snakes and the antidote had been bait. The proctor grinned and clapped once. "A common accident dressed up as a crisis," he said. "The lesson being that the day you forget the basics is the day one of them kills you." I passed to gold, and on Rachel's letter, the moment I passed, they moved me straight to platinum. What happened at Helena's house that same week, I only heard about later. It went like this. 2 collectors from guild headquarters came to her door, Greta with the greatsword, and Quiet Mona with the paperwork. Helena, still convinced the world owed her, took one look at them and decided they'd come to give her hero title back. They hadn't. They'd come with a bill. The loner golem she had broken in a tantrum weeks ago cost 1,000 gold to repair, and the guild wanted its gold. She was still white about it when her father arrived. He'd promised a visit, and he kept his promises. Now, Helena's family isn't noble. They're old adventuring money, and the whole of that family's pride hangs on one thing, the holy sword Valibrand. the heirloom passed down their line. The sword Ada had taken off her in the duel. The sword Helena no longer had. Her father asked to see it. Of course he did. And Helena, sitting there with an empty scabbard and a dry mouth, told him it was at the blacksmith for maintenance. He beamed. Good girl, taking care of the family blade. Then, because she couldn't stop herself, she asked him a small hypothetical. What would he do if she ever lost it? He didn't even pause. He said he could never forgive her. He said he would disown her on the spot, and he meant every word. That was the moment she needed to ask him for the 1,000 gold. It would have saved her, but asking meant he might want to see the sword again, and seeing meant the whole lie coming down on her head, so she didn't ask. She sat on her terror and let it win, and instead begged him to come back and visit. Said she was lonely out here, hadn't made a single friend. He left in high spirits, promising to bring her mother and brother along next time. The instant her father was out of sight, the two collectors were back, and Helena bolted. She didn't get 3 steps. A court-ordered collection isn't magic you argue with. A firm, dry binding closed over her the moment she moved, and held her where she stood. No pay, no walk away. Mona said only that she was sorry, and to please just work it off. Greta hoisted the stiffened, sputtering former hero over one shoulder, like a rolled carpet, entirely unbothered, and remarked that it was one short delivery to the debtor's hall. That was the whole measure of how far Helena had fallen. Without the holy sword, one cheerful collector carried her off with a single arm. The debtor's hall is exactly what it sounds like. Fall into debt with the guild deep enough, and the court sends you here, underground, to work it off on the jobs no free adventurer will touch. Mona runs it, deadpan, and unsurprised by anything a debtor can do. Kirk and Kane were already there. The twins had gone bust weeks back and landed at the bottom ahead of everyone, and by the time Helena arrived, they'd been thoroughly broken in. Their binding work seal had come out stamped as a tiny little heart, which they had complained about at ear-splitting volume until Mona informed them, flatly, that the shape was random and only meant their contract was live. They'd tried the door beside the toilet on her warning not to, and the ward had turned them politely around. And they'd just staggered back from their first assignment, brushing the teeth of some noble's pet, a 5-meter tyrant alligator that previous workers had a habit of not returning from, covered head to boot in tooth marks, alive and deeply unhappy about all of it. Into all that, Greta set Helena down, the former hero who had thrown me away for being weak, the twins who had laughed while they did it, all 3 of them, in the same cold stone room, at the same bottom, holding the same silly heart-stamped ledger. Mona looked Helena over, sighed, and told her the only thing left to tell her, please, just work hard. I didn't see any of that for a long time either. What I knew that week was simpler. I was platinum. I had an army that could level a town and a companion who could end a king in a single second. One exam stood between me and becoming a hero on my own terms. And somewhere across the city, a bearded man with a borrowed golem was deciding it was finally time to come and meet me. They hung a crystal around my neck and told me it was the only thing that mattered. Break the others, keep yours, be the last one standing when the week ran out. That was the whole exam. One seat among the 13 heroes had come open, and every platinum rank adventurer the guild trusted had been called up here to a sealed stretch of mountain to fight for it. The man running it was the reason my hands wouldn't quite stay still. Marcus, the former hero who had never lost a battle and never lost a comrade, a living legend most people only heard about in old stories. He stood in front of the whole field and laid it out plain. Destroy the others' crystals and be the last standing, he said. Do not kill. That is the only rule. Otherwise, do as you like. Give it everything. They handed each of us a pack, 1 week of food and water, nothing more. Anything past that we scavenged or took. Ada leaned close while I studied the rest of the field. Their presence is something else, Master, she murmured. A whole level above the city adventurers. She was right. These weren't the brawlers I'd watched wash out of the lower exams. Every one of them could have carried a party on their own. I looked at all that talent, all those weapons, and I thought about the one thing none of them had. Ada, I said, let's give it everything. While the others hunted each other in the dark, I built. I don't fight. I never have. What I do is decide where the ground ought to be and let the golems put it there. By the time the moon was high, more than a dozen of them were hauling earth up the cliff, packing walls thick enough to laugh at a battering ram, raising towers, folding the approach into a maze that only made sense if you already knew the way through it. Ada kept watch while I worked. She doesn't sleep. She runs on mana, not rest, so the night belonged to her eyes and the golem's hands. By dawn, there was a fort where the evening before there had been bare stone. I slept a few hours behind walls no one else in that exam could have raised, and I slept well. They came for us in the morning, 4 of them, and they carried a name in front of them like a banner. The 4 kings, the pride of some far town where they had never once lost. Their leader was a lean man in spectacles who read my fort like a page and decided it was easy money. Earth mages, he told the others. Nothing but ground magic behind those walls. Mind the tremors and walk right in. I heard the shape of that reasoning later and had to respect it. It was clever. It was also wrong about the one thing that counted. Their strongest came first, a giant of a man named Wade who wore a belt to hold his own strength in check. Because he broke things just living his ordinary life. He reached for that belt at the foot of my wall and took the limiter off, grinning, certain that whatever golem user hid inside was about to fold. Ada met him. She was never a golem. She came down off the wall in her white plate with the holy sword at her hip, and for about 10 minutes the giant threw everything an unchained monster of a man could throw. None of it landed the way he needed it to. She moved through it, around it, inside his reach, and when it was over, he was flat on his back in the dirt with his crystal in her hand, and no idea how he had got there. The long-haired scout who came in with him, Nash, took one look and ran. Ada told me the rest of it with a look on her face I had never quite seen on her. The golems followed the footprints. Within 5 minutes, they had ringed the king's camp, Ada at the center of them, and she gave the 4 exactly one warning. Prepare yourselves. The leader, Reed, looked at the wall of earth closing in, looked at his beaten giant, and made his decision in about a heartbeat. He smashed his own crystal, called it a strategic retreat. Their illusionist, Natalie, did the same, murmuring that Wade had been the strongest of them. Nash followed. All 4 disqualified themselves sooner than trade a single blow. Then they walked off with their chins up, as proud as if they had won something. But that's just surrendering, isn't it? Ada asked me afterward, honestly puzzled. Why act so proud when you just gave up? I didn't have a good answer for her. Some people would rather keep the pose than keep the crystal. After that, we stopped waiting for people to come to us. Ada had a form built just for this. Dark, close-fitting, wrapped in rainbow lizard skin that shifted to match whatever she stood against until she was little more than a ripple in the air. Small golems herded a group of 3 from cover to cover, and no matter how the 3 doubled back or went to ground, the golems were always already waiting. They started to come apart. One of them swore there had to be an invisible watcher stuck to them, feeding the golems their every step. He was exactly right. She was close enough to touch him. When the 3 finally turned to fight the golems, they put their backs to the empty air where Ada was standing. 3 taps to the neck, 3 crystals broken, nobody hurt worse than a bad morning. She stepped back into the color of the trees and was gone. The next pack, 6 of them, had done what I did and holed up behind earth walls of their own. So I didn't send anyone in. Ada changed forms again into the one with the fire and set the trees around their little fort alight. Not carelessly. I'd had the golems clear a break in the timber the night before, so the blaze had nowhere to spread but where I wanted it. The 6 broke and ran for the only safety they could see, which was the river. I had been under that river since morning. Golems don't breathe. Waterproofed, they'd sat on the bottom for hours, patient as stones, and when the candidates dove in to get clear of the smoke, hands of packed earth came up to meet them. 4 went under, crystals gone, and were carried straight to the shallows, so that not one of them so much as swallowed wrong. The last man clawed his way to the far bank and thought he'd made it, right up until a ripple in the air nudged him back into the water where the golems were waiting. 6 down, not a scratch on my side of it. I only found out later that the thinning field had caught someone's eye. More than 20 of the candidates who were left got called together into a hollow by a man I never saw for myself. A soft, well-fed man in an expensive coat, smiling the whole time. He put a heavy bag into each of their hands, 50 gold apiece. He told them plainly that he didn't care about the hero title at all. What he wanted was the golem user broken, not beaten, broken, made to doubt he was worth anything as an adventurer. More than 1,000 gold spent just to see me crack. A few of them were sharp enough to wonder what kind of organization pays that freely and stays that calm about it. Not one of them was sharp enough to hand the gold back. They came all at once, more than 20 of them, screaming a war cry up my cliff as if the gold had already been earned. I watched them from the top of the wall, and I let the maze do the talking. This was the part nobody in my old life had ever understood about me. I couldn't trade blows with a single one of those men and win, but I didn't have to be in the fight. I only had to decide the night before exactly where every one of them would be standing when the fight found them. A wall here, a dead end there, a pit under the one patch of ground that looked safest to run to. I had already won this the way I win everything, hours earlier, quietly, with a shovel and a plan. The first man over the outer wall got driven straight back down by golem fists. The rest poured into the mouth of the maze because there was nowhere else to pour, splitting into little groups the way the passages made them split, certain that a few pit traps wouldn't stop real adventurers. The first pit took a man all the way to the bottom, and a small golem I had folded into the dark down there smashed his crystal before he'd finished landing, eliminated in a hole without ever once seeing a fight. Then the big ones came out. They rose from 3 passages at the same moment, 3 yards of packed earth apiece, and the maze that had felt like a nuisance turned into a thing with teeth. Men who ran from the giants ran into pits. Men who climbed out of pits met more giants. And into all that noise, I sent the little red ones. The first red golem toddled into the middle of them and blew itself apart. A real charge, real gunpowder, a crack and a shove of hot air that put half a dozen candidates flat on the ground, unharmed and screaming. The word went through the mob in seconds. The little red ones are the dangerous ones. The little red ones will end you. So when a whole swarm of red golems came waddling out of the passages after that, the mob broke completely and ran. Only one of those had ever been a bomb. That one was already spent. Every other red golem in that maze was an ordinary digger. I'd had a golem slap a coat of red paint across an hour before. More than 20 grown warriors, routed by paint, tripping into pits and giants, and each other until every last crystal was gone. They never once saw through it. They couldn't have. From the inside, a bluff and a bomb look exactly the same. Then it went quiet, and a voice came rolling across the whole range, magnified until it filled the sky. The examiner's voice. Marcus, calling the exam finished, because only one candidate still wore an unbroken crystal. Me. He climbed up to me himself. The legend I hadn't been able to look at without my hands shaking. The hero who had never lost. And he stood in front of the man his whole guild had spent years calling useless. Too soft to swing a blade. Not worth training. Not worth keeping. That word had followed me out of a torn-up manual and all the way up this mountain, and I had spent every coin and every year since trying to make it a lie. He put out his hand. "Nathan," he said, "congratulations, you are the new hero." He gave me a license, my own license, and where the rank should have been, it said, in plain letters, 13th hero. I held it and read it 3 times over, and still felt like I was about to wake up. I kept waiting for someone to laugh, to tell me there'd been a mistake, that they'd meant to hand it to somebody who could actually fight. Nobody did. A man who had never learned to hold a sword. The 13th of the 13, and every one of the others had earned their seat with a blade. I had earned mine with earth and patience and a bucket of red paint. Ada seized my hand and shook it so hard she nearly took my arm off with it. "You did it, master," she said, and there was a shine in her eyes that I felt land somewhere in my own throat. Your dream came true. I had built my whole life out of the one thing they threw me away for, and it had just carried me to the top of the only ladder that ever mattered to me. I felt the tears come up, and I didn't bother fighting them. Someone was clapping as I came down, slow and delighted. Rachel, the arbitrator who had pushed me toward this exam in the first place, leaning against a post like she'd been enjoying a show all afternoon. It turned out she had been an assistant on the exam the whole time, and she had put money on me. "I bet 100 gold on you, Nathan," she said, grinning. "Made a small fortune. I believed in you." Then she admitted the rest of it. Mostly, she'd wanted to watch the smug assistants who bet against me lose everything, and she had gotten to watch it happen twice over. Marcus told her, flat, not to wager sums like that, even in fun. She promised to reflect on it, in a voice that promised nothing at all. Then she told me there was one more thing waiting for me. A challenge. A golem duel. Not a brawl. A contest of make. Whoever could build the better and more useful golem. And the man who had issued it was the same man who had once smiled at a younger me, told me golem upkeep was simple, easy work, and let that lie get me thrown out of Helena's party. Boil. For half a second, the old wound cracked open. Ada's hand closed into a fist beside me. She remembered exactly who he was. And then I heard the words golem duel a second time, and everything else fell straight out of my head. Another golem maker, someone who built the way I built, who wanted to stand across a field from me and prove his hands were the better ones. I hadn't known there was anyone else like that anywhere in the world. A golem duel? I was already smiling. Of course I accept. The night before the duel, Ada learned to sweep. I'd given her coin that morning for something practical to move in, and she'd come back in a plain work dress with the sleeves buttoned to the elbow and her silver hair tied back off her neck. She turned once in the doorway and asked how she looked. "It suits you," I told her, and meant it. She decided on the spot that this was her housework form, a new set of clothes, a new set of things she could do, and picked up the broom by the hearth like she'd been born holding it. She'd never touched one in her life. The line she swept across the floorboards came out dead straight, corner to corner, not a speck left behind. I stood there with my tea going cold and watched a war golem tidy my rented room better than I ever had. "From now on, I'll clean while you sleep, master," she said, pleased with herself. Then she wanted to cook. I showed her hotcakes, because hotcakes were the one thing I could make without ruining, and I got through exactly one demonstration before she took the pan off me. Her second was better than my best. Her third, she flipped one-handed without looking, caught it flat, and slid it onto the plate like she was dealing a card. She set it in front of me and waited, hands folded, for the verdict. It was, honestly, the finest hotcake I had ever eaten. I told her so. She lit up like I'd handed her a medal and announced that breakfast was hers now, every morning, so I could sleep in. Settled, no arguing. We spent the rest of the evening on it. Eggs, a stew, a thing with onions that got away from us and had to be thrown out laughing. By the time the lamps burned low, the little room smelled like a kitchen that got used, which it never had before. I turned in looking forward to the morning. Ada lingered by the window, and just before I closed my eyes, she said, in the pleased voice of someone hiding a present, that she'd thought of one more thing worth learning. I didn't ask. I should have. It would only have spoiled the surprise. By noon, the arena was as full as I'd ever seen it. Word that the Golem user was giving a public duel had pulled half the city out to the stands, and a simple wooden stage stood in the middle of the sand, waiting for us. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I was excited. Somewhere in this whole business was another man who built golems, and I had spent 10 years thinking I was the only one alive who did. Boyle made an entrance of it. He crossed the sand in a wine-colored coat with gold at every button, a ranking executive of the Golem Research Institute, and behind him lumbered a golem 3 yards tall that I recognized at once. It was mine. It had been, anyway, one of the crude instant golems left over from my hero exam, patched and repainted and put back on its feet. He greeted me warmly for the crowd. Then he made his pitch. The Institute had 1,000 researchers, he said, and a place at the top of it for a talent like mine. Join them, and between us, they could put golems over every city on the continent. I let him finish. "I'll pass," I said. "I don't build these so a man can own a continent." That soured him, but only for a breath, because he'd been saving the next part for a place where everyone could hear it. It was his doing, he told the crowd, almost proud of it. The whispers that got me thrown out of the hero party, the ruined manuals, the ruined name, all of it, arranged by him. He'd expected the words to land on me like a blow. They didn't. They landed on the crowd instead, and the crowd went quiet in a way that was very bad for Boyle. To cover it, he clapped his hands and declared a contest, right there, decided by the people watching. A woman in a blue arbitrator's sash was suddenly at the edge of the stage, as though she'd been waiting all along, and, of course, it was Rachel. She laid out the rules with a showman's grin. Red handkerchiefs for Boyle, blue for me. The louder color wins. If Boyle took it, I'd join the Institute. If I took it, he hands over a monster egg, Rachel said. "Worth 100 gold. Try not to break it, boys." Boyle's golem went first. It raised a broom and swept the boards, slow and stiff, back and forth. He announced grandly that a dustpan function would be added in about a month. The crowd waited for more. There wasn't any more. Sweeping was the whole act. Then it was Ada's turn, and Ada had spent the whole night before getting ready for it. She walked to the center of the boards, and before the Institute's golem had finished its slow sweep, she went up into a clean backflip and came down changed. The white dress gone, the plain work dress in its place, sleeves buttoned, hair tied back, her housework form. She took up a broom and a dustpan and cleared the entire stage in the time it took Boyle's golem to cross it once, every speck gone, and the crowd made a sound I felt in my chest. She wasn't finished. She set a small pan over a flame, poured a hotcake, and flipped it one-handed with a light there, catching it flat to a roar. Then she carried out a little desk, sat down, took up a pen, and began, calmly, to fill out a tax form. I have to explain what that meant to that crowd. The tax forms in this city were a nightmare. Grown adventurers had quit the trade rather than face the paperwork, and here sat a golem doing them, line by line, correct. The stands lost their minds. Rachel was calling it out over the noise, half laughing. "She's filing taxes. Look at her. She's actually filing taxes." Boyle dropped to his knees on the sand, not bowing, just gone out from under, staring at a thing his 1,000 researchers had never once managed. done by a golem that also cooked and cleaned. I didn't gloat. I was honestly mostly disappointed, and I said so before I could think better of it. "That's really it," I said. "I was actually excited. I thought there was someone else out here building, and you took my golem and taught it to push a broom." It was the wrong thing to say to a proud man, or the right thing, depending on how you look at it. Boyle came up off his knees red to the ears, snapping that this had only ever been a prototype, that I'd see a real golem, built from nothing, the finest thing the Institute had, and he turned and stormed off the stage into the staging tunnel. Rachel leaned toward me and murmured that she'd give him 10 minutes. She was almost exactly right. He came back in armor. 10 minutes, near enough. And out of the tunnel clanked a figure in a full suit of plate from crown to boot, visor down, moving with the heavy deliberate tread of something that weighed too much. It stopped at the center of the stage, planted its feet, and announced itself to the whole arena. "I am the Golem Research Institute's masterpiece," it said. "Its finest golem," in Boyle's voice, his exact voice, the same one that had been boasting about 1,000 researchers 5 minutes earlier, coming out from behind the visor with nothing changed but the muffling of the metal. I want to be clear that I knew at once. You cannot build a golem in 10 minutes. You cannot build one in 10 days. And no golem I ever made announced itself in the wounded tone of a man who has just been embarrassed in public. It was Boyle in a suit of armor. It was so plainly Boyle in a suit of armor that a child in the stands could have called it out. So I decided to enjoy it. "Incredible," I said, loud, walking a slow circle around him with a hand on my chin. "I have never in my life seen a golem made to look so exactly like a person. Look at the craftsmanship. Every pore, even the receding hairline. It's as if Boyle himself were standing there pretending to be a golem." Somewhere under the visor, I heard him stop breathing. Rachel picked it up without missing a beat, biting the inside of her cheek, asking the magnificent golem whether it cared to perform, or whether it wished to concede. The armor drew itself up and insisted it would perform, so I reminded it of its own promise. A golem built from nothing, the finest the Institute had. Surely it could manage a somersault while flipping a hotcake. I'd hate for the crowd to feel cheated. The armor hesitated. Then, cornered by its own boasting, it declared that of course it could, and Ada stepped up with the pan. She'd made a fresh hotcake for the occasion. She'd heated the pan with fire magic, one side only, so the underside of the metal was scorching, while the cake on top sat raw and cool, ready to flip. She held it out and told him, kindly, to mind himself. It was hot. Boyle took the pan. Boyle jumped. For one instant, he was actually airborne, plate and all, arms wheeling, and the whole arena leaned in. And then the weight of him took over, and he came down flat on his back with a crash that rang the stage like a struck bell. The pan flew. The raw hotcake turned once in the air, lazy and perfect, and landed batter side down across his visor, and the scorching rim of the metal came down against his gauntleted hand. And Boyle, the Golem Research Institute's finest golem, screamed, "Hot, hot, hot!" For that one breath, I think he saw the whole of it laid out. Flat on his back with the hotcake sliding off his face and a city laughing. The sabotage, the 10 wasted years, the borrowed golem, the armor. Every clever thing he had ever done to me arriving all at once at this. A grown man yelping at a warm pan in front of the very people he'd come to impress. He had dug the hole with his own hands and jumped into it in a full suit of plate. Ada looked down at him and said it plainly, for everyone to hear. "Master, that isn't a golem. That's only Boyle in armor. A golem wouldn't have felt the heat." Rachel called the vote, though there was nothing left to decide. The stands came up in a single color, blue everywhere, corner to corner. Not one red rag lifted in the whole arena. The same clean, straight line Ada had swept across my floor the night before, drawn now across a city. Unanimous. I stood in the middle of it and felt something I had been carrying for a long time quietly set itself down. Since the day they tore my manual in half and told me to go, I'd kept one splinter lodged somewhere I couldn't reach. The small, ugly thought that maybe they had been right, that maybe I really was the useless one. Now I knew the shape of the truth. I hadn't failed out of that party. I'd been pushed, on purpose, by the man currently lying in a suit of armor with batter on his visor. The useless one had just outbuilt an institute of 1,000 in front of the whole city, with a broom and a hotcake. And the strange thing was that I didn't hate him. I looked down at Boyle and felt no heat at all, only a sort of distant, tired amusement. Whatever was coming to him now, he had built it himself, the same way he built everything, out of other men's work and his own pride. I was done needing anything from him. even the pleasure of it. Rachel pressed the wager into my hands on her way past. A monster egg the size of 2 fists, warm, heavier than it looked. Something shifted inside it, faint, just once, against my palm. I wrapped it up and set it in my pack to look at properly later. There would be time. That was the last I saw of Boyle for a good while. What happened to him after? I only heard about secondhand, and it was worse and stranger than anything the crowd got to watch. The same week I won the egg, 3 people I used to know all washed up at the bottom of the same hole. The debtor's hall is where the courts send adventurers who owe more than they can pay. Not a prison, exactly, but a hall of court-ordered work where you clear your debt one dull task at a time, and a binding ward on the door keeps you from simply strolling out. I heard about the day Helena was brought in from the overseer herself later, and the way she tells it, it went badly from the very first minute. Helena came in behind a soft-spoken sorceress named Mona, who runs the place with a notebook and a great deal of patience. Waiting inside, already serving debts of their own, were Kirk and Kane, and the twins took one look at the fallen hero being marched down the steps and enjoyed themselves enormously, crowing that the great hero had ended up down here too. Helena rounded on them and demanded they use her name, that she was no hero anymore. They stamped the binding seal onto her debt badge, a small blue star that only meant the contract was live, and told her the ward would hold her until the work was done. She did not take that well. The twins' own seals had come out, by some clerk's idea of a joke, as a pair of little hearts, which they were loudly unhappy about, and Helena leapt straight to the worst possible reading of what a heart on a work badge might mean. Mona tried to explain it was nothing of the sort. Helena wasn't listening. Helena was already looking for the door. She found it, the forbidden one, the one to the surface, tucked beside the washroom. She excused herself, marched straight over, and hauled it open. The ward turned her around as gently and as firmly as a hand on the shoulder and set her back down inside the hall, mid-stride, so that she stumbled into the twins and all 3 of them went over in a heap. Then, Mona told them the day's work. The arena needed cleaning after a certain golem duel, and the 3 of them were assigned to it. All 3 refused, insulted, a hero and 2 platinum ranks, sent to sweep up after a show, and the ward simply held them fast, comfortable and immovable, until they gave in. Helena, flat on the floor and going nowhere, swore they could chain her to this hall, but they would never own her pride. Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. Mona only let out the sigh of a woman who says the same thing every day to people who never once listen, and, worn to the bone, muttered a wish that her sister were there, and that a fellow named Nathan might come and take this one off her hands. I didn't know, when I heard that, what to make of the fact that she'd said my name. I still don't, but that's a thread for later. Boyle's own reckoning came down from higher up, and I only pieced it together from the talk that drifted out of the institute afterward. The Golem Research Institute is not a building, it's a town, a whole town of nothing but researchers and the people who feed them and clean up after them. And at the center of it stands a tower, and at the top of that tower sits the director. Nobody sees the director. He keeps a heavy curtain drawn across half the room and speaks from behind it in a low, level voice. And that is all anyone in that place has ever gotten of him. Boyle knelt in front of that curtain and was made to account for himself. The director listed it all back to him, unhurried. The duel lost in public, the business of dressing up in armor to pretend he was a golem, and the research egg, a valuable thing, gambled away on that duel and now sitting warm in a stranger's pack. Boyle apologized and apologized again, and sweated through his fine coat. And then the voice behind the curtain did something worse than shout. It said the idea was interesting. A man pretending to be a golem. The director turned the phrase over as though he rather liked it. Then he passed sentence. Boyle would become a golem. For 1 week, he would wear a tag that named him 1, sworn to obey whatever anyone told him, and he would do precisely that. A junior researcher was already stepping forward with a wooden tag on a cord, and the look on his face was not the look of a man about to be kind. The tag went around Boyle's neck, and it turned out a great many people at the institute had been waiting a long time for exactly this. The junior who'd hung it on him gave the first order, massage my shoulders, and when Boyle started to sputter that a peon didn't give him orders, the reminder came down soft from behind the curtain. A golem that won't obey is a defective golem, and defective golems get broken back down into soil and scattered over the garden. Boyle massaged the man's shoulders until his fingers cramped. Then he opened the door to slip away and found a line already waiting in the corridor. "Fetch my lunch," tend my field, sweep the street. I'm bored. Say something funny. For 1 full week, the ranking executive of the Golem Research Institute fetched and swept and told jokes on command to every clerk and cleaner who had ever resented him, wearing a sign that called him a golem. And the whole week, I'm told, he blamed one single person for all of it. Not himself, me. Somewhere under the humiliation, he was already promising himself that once the week was done, he'd build a slower, quieter, far more careful plan and finish me for good. I didn't lose any sleep over Boyle. Boyle was a small man who had finally been measured. The curtain, though, the voice behind it, the one that could turn a man into a golem with a single sentence and never once show its face. The thing that owned a town and 1,000 researchers and treated the whole business of ruining my life as a mildly interesting afternoon. That one hadn't moved yet. That one hadn't even properly looked my way. I didn't know it that day, standing in a loud arena with a warm egg in my pack and a wound finally healed over. But the man who tore my manual in half was never the one I'd need to fear. He was only the first hand the shadow had reached out with, and there were a great many more of them, still folded, waiting behind the curtain. The morning after I beat an institute of 1,000 men with a broom and a hotcake, I spent on my knees in the yard with an egg in my lap. It had come off Boyle as a wager prize, 2 hands wide, a shell as hard as cold steel, heavier than it looked. I turned it over and found nothing. No seam, no give, no way in that wouldn't kill whatever was inside. Let me listen, Ada said. A pair of tall scout ears rose out of her silver hair, turning, tracking a sound I couldn't hear. She went very still. There, a heartbeat, faint. It is alive, master, but it is not ready to move yet. So we set it in a crate of straw against the wall and left it to its own time. Some things you cannot hurry. A man who forces a shell open usually ruins the very thing he wanted out of it. Then I turned to the harder job. Garrick, that was the name I'd give him by noon, lay in pieces across the yard. My old combat golem, the big one, the one my party hauled to every dungeon and never once called by a name. Left arm cracked clean through at the shoulder, right arm gone entirely, torn off and never fixed, because fixing it had been my job, and they'd sent me away before I could. I sank my hands into good sifted soil and read him the way I read everything, for where he'd broken and where he still wanted to hold. Ada knelt beside me and kneaded fresh clay, patient, packing it into the seam while I set the lattice. Hours went by. The arm came back, the shoulder closed. I stood him up in the gray light and told him to move, and the great fists opened and shut at my word. There you are, I said. Garrick. Ada looked up at him with something close to pride. Garrick, she repeated softly. Big sister Garrick. She had decided, somewhere in her own head, that every golem I made was family, and that this one outranked her. I didn't correct her. It was a good morning for it. He would need armor for where we were going, and I knew exactly what to skin him in. I carried the bronze arm grizzly's shell into Hugo's forge, and the young smith nearly dropped his tongs. Everyone in the quarter knew that shell. The grizzly had been a disaster-class monster, the kind that empties a road for a whole season, and it had gone down on one of my hunts. Hugo turned a plate of the dull bronze hide over in his soot-black hands like it was a holy relic. This is really it, he breathed. Nathan, half the town says you took that thing down nearly on your own. That's a bit exaggerated, I said, and it mostly was. I pointed him at Garrick instead, armor from the grizzly's shell. It turned away flame. It was harder than anything a forge could beat flat, and it was heavy, which suited me fine. Garrick could carry a house on his back and never notice. The plating had barely settled on his shoulders when the doorway filled up with smiths. 10 of them, broad as barrels, everyone grinning. They were the men whose trade I'd changed without meaning to. My adamantite mining golem had made a metal that used to cost lives cheap enough to share around, and the old blacksmith who first bought it had spread it through the whole quarter. These were the men it had lifted. We're the smiths of this town, one of them said, and clapped a hand on my shoulder that nearly folded me in half. And we owe you a proper dinner. They fed me until I could barely stand. The tables ran out of the house and into the garden, lanterns strung through the branches, and every smith in the quarter wanted to put something on my plate. We talked craft half the night, where a hammerfall wants to land, how a magic stone seats in a chest cavity, the small quarrels between men who shape metal and men who shape earth. Fellow makers. I hadn't had that in a long time, and I hadn't known how much I missed it until it was in front of me. Somewhere in the middle of it, a girl sat down beside me, a smith's daughter, easy and forward, close enough that her shoulder found mine. Mind if I sit here? She tilted her head. Nathan, do you have a girlfriend right now? I was still working out how to answer when Ada leaned in from my other side. No fuss, no edge to it at all. She brushed a crumb from the corner of my mouth with one finger, the way you'd tend to something that plainly belonged to you, and asked what I'd like for breakfast tomorrow. The girl looked between the two of us, read the whole thing in a single heartbeat, and laughed. Ah, I'll go grab some food over there. Off she went, cheerful as anything, like a cat that had wandered into another cat's yard and thought better of staying. Ada didn't gloat. She simply made a small private note about a flavor at the table, something to remember and cook for me later, and went back to being happy. She wasn't jealous. She had decided a long time ago whose I was, and nothing at that table was going to trouble her about it. An hour's carriage ride from town, past an old stone gate, and down a spiral stair that seemed to have no bottom, the world opened into a forest under the earth. There was a sky down there, a false one, a glowing ceiling that brightened and dimmed on its own, a day and a night with no sun behind them, trees older than any nation I could name, stone roads that crumbled away under the roots and earned the place its name. The Ironhold Labyrinth, one of 13 S-rank dungeons on the whole continent, and my post now, mine to guard as a hero by thinning what lived in it. No hero had ever reached its deepest floor. I meant to be the first. That was the entire point of me being there. We hadn't gone far when a killer scorpion came boiling out of the rocks. Fast, giant, a shell no smith's hammer could so much as dent. I didn't reach for a weapon. I don't carry one. I said her name, and Ada answered. Valkyrie form. White plate closed over her in a single breath, and she was gone and back before the thing had finished turning. One thrust, driven into the one narrow gap where that armor wants to give. The scorpion dropped and stayed down. She hadn't taken a scratch. Deeper in, her hearing caught a petrified anaconda holding its breath in the dark. A body 10 yards long, a stare that turns a man to stone where he stands. A stare does nothing at all to a golem. Garek simply walked into its coils, let it wind itself around his chest, and closed his bronze arms until it stopped moving. By the time the false sky dimmed toward evening, we had crossed ground it once took my old party 3 full days to cover. We had done it in 1. We made camp in a clearing. Ada kept watch while I cooked. A stew from packed stores and a cut of the day's monster meat, better than it had any right to be. She asked about my life before the party. She had been asking in small pieces for a while, and that night I told her the long version. How I started building golems as a boy. How an old neighbor of mine, a scholar named Vera, who could read languages dead for 1,000 years, sat with me over ancient golem texts when no one else thought a strange quiet child was worth the hours. How my very first golem was knee-high and lopsided and fell to pieces inside a day, and how I loved the thing anyway. Ada listened the way she did everything completely. Master's cooking is delicious, she said when I'd finished, which was her way of telling me the rest of it had landed too. Please, leave the dishes to me. I let her. Above us, the false ceiling hung full dark, not a star in it, and I lay back thinking about a promise I'd made a long time ago, to reach the bottom of a place exactly like this one, and how close the road had finally brought me. The next day, a little past the false noon, we reached it, the deepest point my old party had ever touched, the wall they always turned back at, the line that for years had been the far edge of what I was allowed to be. I stood on it a moment, then I stepped over it and started working out where the house would go. My old party had never built anything down here. They made camps, a fire, a ring of watch, gone by morning, temporary, borrowed ground. It had never once occurred to any of them that a person could simply stay. It had occurred to me. I scouted the ground with Ada until the map showed me what I wanted. Flat land, well above any floodline, a stream close enough to hear from the door. Then I called the earth up out of itself. 20 instant golems rose where I set my hands, and they went straight to work, felling trees, dragging stumps, hauling in the tools Garek had carried ahead of us. The land came clear in an afternoon, from a proper blueprint, a real one, bought from the city's building guild, not scratched into the dirt. The golems began to raise a house, walls, a frame, a garden marked out along one side. While they built, we went for lunch, and the frontier started handing me gifts. I pulled a trout out of the stream nearly as long as my arm. Ada took one look at it and decided to fry it in butter before I'd even landed the thing. And in the undergrowth, half hidden, I found medicinal herbs growing wild and huge, 2 full sizes past anything the surface ever managed to grow. The guild had always sworn you couldn't farm a dungeon, that the monsters would never allow it. The guild had never had 20 golems to stand guard over a row of vegetables. By evening, the house still wasn't finished, but it stood, walls up, roof taking shape, a home rising out of ground no one in the world had ever bothered to claim. I sat down on a cut stump and looked at it, and something in my chest went quiet and full at the same time. Not the deepest floor, not yet, but past the line that had held me my whole life, on land that was mine because I had made it mine. I told Vera once, when I was small, that I would reach the bottom of the world for her. That was the first day I truly believed I would. 3 weeks turned the house into a fortress, and the fortress into a machine that fed itself. I had a wall now, and a maze behind it that nothing crossed cleanly. When something came howling through, a heavy golem stepped out and put it down. Anything with wings got shot out of the air before it cleared the parapet. Then the small ones went to work, mini golems hauling the bodies to the dismantlers, who sorted every kill into magic stones, materials, meat, and waste. The stones went straight back into powering more golems. That was the part I was proudest of. Every monster that threw itself at my home didn't cost me a single thing. It paid me. It became stone and material and dinner, and the stone became another golem to meet the next one that came. An attack wasn't a danger anymore. It was the frontier delivering resources to my door, over and over, for free. The garden came in around all of it. We'd harvested radishes once already. A wild grain much like wheat had turned up in the brush, enough to promise bread instead of an endless run of potatoes. The transplanted herbs were multiplying so fast I'd be shipping them up to the surface inside a month. Garrick spent his days paving roads outward, so the next stretch of exploring would go quicker. I had built a place that needed no one, not the guild, not a party, not one single soul who had ever called me a burden and meant it. Just me and the things I made and quiet, which was exactly when the quiet broke. I was fishing, that was all. A line in my own little stream, a lazy afternoon. The tiny fish I'd stalked myself nosing at the hook. Then a voice came over the wall, thin, cracking, begging. Help me, please, help me. I sat very still, because there was no one who could be saying it. I held the only title that opened this dungeon. I was, as far as the whole world knew, the single living soul who could stand where I was standing. And somebody was on the other side of my own wall, dying. I went to look carefully. Beyond the stones, crumpled in the dirt, was something I had never seen in my life. A cat that walked on 2 legs, no taller than a child, light brown fur, matted dark where he was hurt. He lifted his head when he saw me, and every word plainly cost him. Nice to meet you, he managed. I am Marlin, chief of the cat tribe. Please, I beg you, help. Then his eyes rolled back, and he went down in the dirt and did not move. I stood at the edge of everything I had built, the walls, the farms, the machine that owed me nothing and owed the world even less, and looked down at a wounded stranger who could not possibly be here. And I already knew I wasn't going to leave him lying there. Whatever had done that to him was still down here somewhere, and it had just become my problem. The little cat man ate like he'd forgotten food was a thing that could run out. I set a plate of smoked trout in front of him, and he went through it in the time it took me to pour the water. 3 days, he'd said, since anything close to a real meal. He had washed up at my wall half dead the night before, and one of Ada's potions had put the color back in him, but it was the trout that finished the job. Halfway through the second helping, he started crying into it, thanking me between bites, and I let him. When he was full, he sat up straight and made it formal. He was Marlin, chief of the cat tribe, and his people didn't live on my layer. They lived on the one below it, the second layer, the one no hero on record had ever reached. He said it plainly, the way you'd name a town. I felt my hand go still on the water jug. Their village was gone. Something had come through and destroyed it, and 36 of them had run, up an old stair their ancestors used to talk about. The kind of thing you half believe is a story until you're standing on it. The stair had carried them to a small island in the middle of a lake on my floor. Marlin had swum out to test the crossing, to see if it was safe to bring the others. Something in the water had nearly killed him for it. He'd barely reached my wall. 35 of them are still out there, he said, and his paws closed around the empty cup. Please, I can't reach them alone. I didn't make him finish the ask. Then we go get them, I told him. Now, Ada was already packing potions. The way down wasn't quiet. We hadn't gone far under the false green daylight of the cavern ceiling when the ground ahead came apart and a scorpion the size of a cart hauled itself out of the leaf litter. Its tail rode up over its back like a drawn hammer. I started to call Ada forward. Marlin beat me to it. My legs are fine now, he said, already moving. Leave this one to me. I had carried this cat man home over my shoulder a night ago. I was not ready for what I watched next. He went in low and fast under the pincers, and when the tail came down, he didn't dodge it. He took the sting square in the shoulder and kept going. That stinger held a poison, a single spoonful of which could kill 10 grown men. Marlin didn't so much as slow. He got a grip on the tail, tore it clean off, and then he was up in the trees, bounding trunk to trunk, building speed. "Triangle smash," he said, almost cheerful, and came down with his club and put the scorpion's head into the dirt. He landed, rolled the stung shoulder like it had gone a little stiff, and grinned at me. I made a note. The cat tribe were not what they looked like. We had barely started walking again when the second one came. A gargoyle, a living slab of winged stone, meaner in every way than the scorpion. This time, Ada didn't wait to be asked. "This one's mine, master," she said, and stepped past me in her white plate. Million thrust. I have watched Ada do that 100 times, and I still can't count the strikes. The gargoyle simply came apart, stone falling in neat pieces where a monster had been standing. Marlin whistled through his teeth and told her she was incredible. Ada thanked him and checked her blade. Garrick walked ahead of all of us, shouldering fallen trunks and broken rock out of the path so the rest of us could keep pace. 3 hours of that, down and down, and then the trees opened and we came out on the shore of the lake. It was beautiful, which I hadn't expected. A wide, dark mirror of water with a single island at its heart, and on that island, small shapes moving. Marlin's people, watching us come. He lifted a hand to them, and his voice cracked when he told me they had maybe 2 weeks of food left. 2 weeks, and then the island became a grave. I was working out how to move 35 people across open water when the open water answered the question for me. The lake bulged. A long neck rose out of it, and then a head, and then more neck, until the thing stood taller than a house 3 stories high, with most of its body still hidden under the surface. A dragon's skull, the color of old ice. Marlin didn't have to name it. I named it myself, the word arriving from somewhere I don't examine too closely. The frost leviathan, Glakama. A wyvern had been circling the lake, one of those small fire-breathing dragons, and it made the mistake of diving at the giant. It opened its mouth to loose flame. Glakama exhaled first. A breath of white rolled over the wyvern, and the wyvern simply stopped, frozen solid in the air, a statue that dropped into the lake and sank. The fire never came. Beside me, Ada's voice went quiet. "Master, that is the layer guardian." She didn't look away from it. "With what I can do now, I can't fight that head on." She wasn't wrong, and she wasn't the type to say it if she were. Firepower was not going to win this. So I stopped thinking about firepower. I looked at the lake instead. All that water the guardian needed in order to be a guardian. And I thought about where a thing that big actually wanted to break. Not its hide, its home. "All right," I said. "We're going to take every drop of water out of this lake." Marlin looked at me like I'd spoken another language. Ada looked at me like she had already started believing it. I found out about the other thing much later, and only in pieces. It's worth telling now because of how it lined up. While I stood at that lake deciding to empty it, a man in a wine-colored coat was standing in a tower room on the surface, behind a great drawn curtain, pitching a plan to the shadow that sat behind it. Boyle, the man from the Institute who'd spent months trying to bury me and kept burying himself instead. His plan this time was clever, in the way clever people are clever right before they walk into a wall. He would quietly hire adventurers to buy up every medicinal herb in the region, corner the whole market, and choke off the supply that recovery potions were made from. Starve me of potions, and my little frontier would starve with me. He called it a bloodless victory. He asked the shadow behind the curtain for 50 gold coins to begin, and promised it would come back a fortune. The shadow found it amusing and said yes. Here is what neither of them knew. At that very moment, on my layer, in the garden I'd raised with my own golems, I was growing medicinal herbs of my own, better than anything on that surface market, in quantities I couldn't use fast enough. Boyle was about to spend a fortune tightening a noose around a neck I had already stepped out of. He would corner a market I no longer needed to buy from. I didn't know to laugh about it yet. I had a lake to drain. Draining a lake is not one job, it's 3, and I had given myself 2 weeks to do all of them. The first was the water. 3 rivers fed that lake, and only one drained it. So I built a crew of big digging golems and put them to cutting a channel, a diversion, to bend all 3 feeder rivers straight around into the outflow before they ever reached the basin. Cut the supply, then widen and deepen the drain, and the lake had nowhere to sit. 5 days of golems moving earth without rest. Marlin made himself useful the whole time, ranging out to hunt the layers monsters and hauling their magic stones back by the sackful, because stones were what all of this ran on. Cutting the inflow wasn't fast enough on its own, so I built a second kind of golem, waterproof, sealed tight, tireless, and set hundreds of them to carrying the lake out by hand, leather bag after leather bag, tipping it into the drain. Day by day, the shoreline crept outward. Rocks that had never seen light broke the surface. Fish flapped in shrinking pools, and the water sank. That was the first task. The second was an army. I had been building golems since I was a boy, one at a time, careful. Somewhere along the way, the world had taught me to stop being careful about it. With the mountain of magic stones Marlin kept dragging in, I stopped counting. Over 4 days, I raised 300 waterproof combat golems, 300 of them, a standing army lining the drying lake bed, blank-faced and patient, run on stones instead of my own thin store of mana, which meant the only real limit on how many I could make was how many stones I could feed them. I stood in a drained lake bed and counted 300 soldiers I had made with my own hands. The party that threw me out never once imagined this was the thing they had thrown away. The third task was Ada. I had been saving the best of the materials for her. Over the last 5 days, I built her something new, a form I'd been turning over in my head since the blacksmith's dinner, and the weapons to go with it. She watched me work on it with the patience of someone being fitted for armor she already trusted. By the last day, the lake was a memory of itself, waist deep at the middle and still shrinking, the island a hill now instead of an island, aquatic monsters stranded and gasping in the shallows. And out in what was left of the water sat Glacama, fins built for a deep lake now scraping mud, its whole body gone clumsy, half-beached, its speed taken from it. I had pulled the Guardian out of its element without ever raising a hand to it. "Let's go," I said. "Ada, Marlin." Ada's new form took the field first. She had changed. A sniper's build now, a great dark adamantite bow in her hands, a span of pale wings spread behind her that read the wind instead of carrying her anywhere. The bow was too strong for any human arm to draw. That was the point of it. She sighted down the drying lake at the Guardian's skull, held for one breath, and loosed. The arrow crossed the whole basin and struck Glacama square in the head. It should have punched through anything. It scratched it, the hide barely dented, and the Guardian turned, slow and enormous, and fixed on the small white figure who dared to sting it. "It actually hit," Ada said, almost delighted, already moving. "This form makes the aiming so easy, Master." Then the breath came. Glacama opened its jaws and white death rolled out, and where it touched the shore, the mud went to ice, and the very air froze into falling crystal. Ada ran. Marlin ran with her, the two of them strung out along the shoreline, close enough to keep the Guardian's eyes, far enough that each blast of frost cracked down behind their heels. Breath after breath. They were bait, and they knew it, and they kept it furious and kept it looking the wrong way, which was all I needed, because it was not looking at the water. 300 golems were already in the water. They had waded in low and quiet, while the Guardian spent its whole attention on Ada and Marlin, and now they stood ringed all the way around it in the shallows, and every one of them held a bow. I let the Guardian take one more step toward the shore. "Not yet, not yet. Now," I called. "All of you, fire." 300 bows sang at once. The volley came in from every side, and Glacama screamed and did the only thing it knew how to do. It threw its head around and breathed again, sweeping the ring, and one after another my golems went to ice. 300 of them frozen mid-stance, a garden of statues standing in the mud. It cost me every last one. It bought 5 seconds. That was the trade, and I had made it on purpose. "Go, Garek!" Garek had circled wide behind it while the golems died. More than a ton of bronze-plated golem hit the Guardian from its blind side, a fist like a falling boulder against the base of that skull. The head rocked. For a moment, I thought that might be it, and then Glacama simply swung its neck and swatted him, and a ton of golem went cartwheeling across the lake bed and did not get back up. But 5 seconds was all I'd asked for, and the head was low now. "Ada, Marlin," the plan. They had been waiting for the head to drop. Ada caught Marlin on her arm and threw him, flung the little chief up and out with everything her new frame had, and Marlin rode it, club raised, and came down on the crown of that skull with the whole meteor of himself behind it. "Combined technique," he roared on the way down. "Meteor strike!" The club cracked against ice-hard bone, and the breath died in the Guardian's throat. It reared, stunned, its one weapon broken for a heartbeat, and that heartbeat belonged to Ada. She had already changed again. White plate, closing the distance across the mud faster than the eye wanted to follow. A knight now instead of a marksman. Glacama never saw her come. "I won't let you," she said. "Million thrust." I couldn't count the strikes. Nobody could. The Guardian shuddered along its whole length, and the great head came down, and the frost leviathan that no hero had felled in living memory settled into the mud of its emptied lake and went still. Silence. Just the drip of melting frost. My legs gave out and put me on the ground, and I let them. Ada sat down hard where she stood, spent to the last of her magic, and I looked out at the field of my frozen golems. 300 of them who had stood in a lake and let a myth freeze them so the rest of us could live, and I thanked them quietly. I know what they were. I thanked them anyway. Then Marlin was running past me toward the island, shouting, and the shapes on the hill were coming down to meet him, and every single one of them was alive. The cat tribe came down off that island, half-starved and weeping, 35 of them, thin and shaking, and Marlin went through them, touching shoulders and counting faces until he had counted everyone. With the lake gone, the fish were easy, stranded in the shallows, there for the taking, and Ada cooked them with a flick of fire while the tribe crowded close. They ate the way Marlin had eaten that first night, crying into their food, asking if there might be more, and we told them yes, all of it, as much as they wanted. Marlin found me in the middle of it and gripped my hand in both of his. "We saved them," he said. "All of them. Thank you, Nathan. Truly." I built a handful of fresh golems and set them to taking the Guardian apart, carefully this time, not for the kill, but for what it had left behind. Deep inside it, I found the stone, a magic stone the size of my chest, snow white and cold enough to ache in the hand, larger by far than anything I'd ever pulled from a monster. On the surface, it would have sold for a number I didn't have a word for. I decided not to sell it. "I'm going to put this into you," I told Ada, "a new form. I want to see how strong you can actually become." She stared at the stone, then at me. "Is it really all right to spend something like that on me?" "There's nothing I would rather spend it on," I said, plainly, and she went quiet in the way she does when she's too happy to have a line ready. I went back up to the surface to sell the rest of it, and I very nearly broke the guild. I gave my report at the branch counter, plain as I could manage, and the old branch chief came around the desk with his eyes wet. He told me he had never thought he would live to see a floor guardian brought down, that he was glad he'd taken the post, if only to be standing here for it. Then he did the arithmetic and had to sit. 20 million gold, he said. "It's every coin of cash we have on hand. Take it as an advance. We will owe you another 100 million for the rest of the materials. 120 million, all told, for one monster." I had Ada bring the head out of her storage space to prove it was real, and the whole hall went silent when that skull of snow and bone filled the floor. The adventurers who had been eavesdropping crowded the chief the moment they heard the rest of the Guardian would be forged into weapons and sold off by lottery to the high ranks. One of those, someone breathed, would be a treasure to hand down for life. I let them buzz. I arranged to meet the guild's transport team at the lake the next morning, and I thought about the second layer waiting below it, and the floors under that. And far under all that celebration, at the very bottom of it, 3 people I used to travel with were about to make their situation worse. I wasn't there. I heard about it the way you hear about weather in a town you have left, but I have turned it over enough times to see it clearly. At the debtors' hall, where the court had sent them to work off what they owed, the overseer, a small, tired woman named Mona, had drawn them a simple job, a fragile sample of monster material, sealed in a large jar, to be carried across the yard from one store to another. Slow, careful work. She told them so plainly. The sample mattered, she said, and it would shatter if they were rough with it. Carefully. She said it more than once. They weren't listening. Helena, who still, after everything, called herself a hero to anyone who'd hold still for it, took the job as an insult. She wanted monster subjugations, real work, not errands a child could run, and she swore on the name she no longer had any right to that she'd have the thing across the yard faster than anyone alive. The twins, Kirk and Kane, grumbled the whole way about hauling somebody else's kill, never once wondering whose guardian that sample had been cut from. Mine, as it happened. They were carrying a piece of my monster and complaining about the weight of it, so they did it their way. They put their shoulders into the cart and shoved it across the yard at a dead run, and a loose stone caught the wheel, and the cart pitched, and the jar went off the front of it and burst on the ground. The sample was ruined in an instant. One of the twins ended up pinned under the cart, hollering for his sister to drag him free. Mona didn't shout. From everything I heard, she doesn't shout anymore. She looked at the mess, and she sighed the sigh of a woman who has run entirely out of surprise, and she wrote it down. The cost of the sample, added to what each of them already owed, and more time, more long months of this, for all 3 of them. They had been handed one careful task and turned it into a deeper hole, entirely by their own hands. I didn't feel much when I heard, not triumph, barely even anger anymore. Mostly, I thought it was a shame that people could be handed the very bottom and still keep digging. That night, I sat at the edge of the frontier I'd built and let it be quiet for a while. A while back, a party of people had torn my manual in half and told me I was dead weight, that the man who fixed the golems and mended the gear and kept the whole machine running was the one part of it they could afford to throw away. So they threw me away. and every single thing around me now had grown out of that. The walls, the farm, the army I'd frozen into a lake, Ada, resting against the doorframe with a guardian stone waiting to make her stronger, a whole tribe of people down below who owed me their lives, and a chief who had become a friend. The support man they cut loose had turned out to be the thing holding the entire structure up. He always had been. That was the joke none of them ever got, that the useless one was the foundation. Marlin's people would rebuild on the second layer, and I would keep going down, the way I had promised an old scholar I would, back when I was a boy with one lopsided golem and far too large a dream. There were two things I didn't look at too hard that night, because they were tomorrow's problems, and not tonight's. One was the egg. It sat where I had left it, warm, unhatched, a heartbeat ticking away inside it that Ada could still hear when the world went quiet, alive, waiting, not ready to move yet, but not never either. The other was the shadow behind that curtain on the surface. Boyle I could handle. Boyle was a man who kept handing me his own rope. But the thing he answered to, the one that sat behind the cloth and found all of this so amusing, had not yet turned its full attention on me. When it did, I would want every wall and every golem and every friend I had made. For tonight, though, the lake was empty, the tribe was fed, and the man they had thrown away had built himself a foundation deep enough to stand on. Whatever came next could come.